nongere reka mbahe ikaze abakunzi ba East African Daily Update. Ndabasuhuje kandi mbifurije ibihe byiza. Ni Jean Paul Turayishimye, turi kumwe nanone muri iki kiganiro. Nariho nshaka kugira ngo twumve iya Security Council ibyo barimo kuvuga, ariko habaye glitch, barimo baravuga ibintu bya Palestine, barimo baravuga ibintu bya Palestine aho kugira ngo bavuge ibintu bya Congo. Ibyo ntabwo ari ikosa ryacu, Bila Truth. Ah, barimo barafata ibyicaro ariko baravuga ibintu bitari byo, Bila Truth. Barimo baravuga ibintu bya Palestine. Nagira ngo nsabe mwenyihanganire gatoya. Kandi bavuze ko n'inama nirangira ubundi bagombye guhita bakora press conference nayo nifuza kugira ngo bagezeho, ariko ntabwo ari njyewe gusa nabibonye ko abantu bose babonye ko harimo havugwa ibitandukanye, n'abandi bose bari batangiye kuyishyiraho basanze barimo bavuga ibintu bitari ibya Kongo. Ubwo rero ahubwo titre iravuga ko ari Kongo, ariko birashobora kuba bayobeje, yenda bayobye bakaba bagiye ku yindi, yenda baduhaye link itariyo. Barimo baravuga ibintu byo muri Middle East. Umuntu wo muri Spain niwe wari urimo kuvuga, ariko byitwa ko ari situation ya Kongo. Reka rero dukomeze turebe ko byatungana. Hari inama eshatu uyu munsi, hariya kuri aya masaha ya saa tatu hari inama ya 57 ni very plenary meeting, ndetse hakaba n'iya iya Kongo bayishyize saa 9:15. Reka rero noneho nkomeze mbasuhuze kandi reka nyibasangize mu gihe bakiri bayimuriye amasaha. Reka turebe ko kuko perezida wa Security Council yamaze gutafata ibyicaro, ariko arimo aravuga ibintu byo muri Algeria, nubwo handitse ko ari Congo, muri Middle East, nubwo handitse ko ari kuri Congo, ariko ntabwo ariyo arimo kuvuga. Mu kanya rero biragaragara ko bayimuye, bayishyize na 15. Nabonaga ikibazo niho cyaturutse, ariko reka nze nyibasangize noneho nibaramuka bagiyeho ndizera ko turi buhite dukomeza. Yarafashe ibyo barimo nabonaga ari bya Spain. Reka rero akazi kababanye kenshi, ariko reka mbashyirireho iyacu.
The agency's capacity to provide humanitarian aid. The Palestinians in the West Bank have been
baracyari mu bintu bya Palestine nanone, nubwo byitwa ko ari ibya Kongo, ariko ntabwo igihe kiragera, ntabwo baratangira. Ntimugire rero ngo ibyo yenda mugire ngo ni jyewe byapfiriyeho gusa. Ndabona ari ikibazo kiri biragaragara ko muriho ndabona message noneho iravuga ko baratangira inama batinze, biraba ari hafi ya saa 10, kuko inama ya Palestine yatangiye mu gitondo, ntabwo yarangiye ku gihe. Kandi abakivuga ni benshi, ngo speakers bo kuri Middle East baracyari benshi. Ubwo rero ndumva mbahaye twa update dutoya, ariko nkeneye gukora ubushakashatsi cyangwa se kuvugana n'abantu mu gihe nabaha izo updates, mu gihe dutegereje ko iyi nama itangira. Urumva abantu inama donc yeba itangira, kandi umuntu umwe umuyobozi wayo akaba ari muri yindi nama ya Palestine cyangwa se ya Middle East. Ntabwo nibaza yuko nta mpamvu yo kugira ngo dukomeze dutegereze, ariko ndashaka kugira ngo mbahe update ngufi cyane ku bintu byiriwe mu karere. Umva hiriwe ibintu bibi byinshi cyane kandi biri violent. Asante sana, urakoze cyane, merci. So reka mpere kuri Goma. Ndabizi ko mwabonye amakuru yiriwe acicikana hirya no hino uyu munsi. Okay, ngo bari hafi gutangira kuko nayo mbonye bayishyize na 15. Mureke ibi bya update yenda twaba tubiretse tukabanza twumva akanama k'umutekano, kuko ndagira ngo dutangirire icyarimwe. Okay, kugira ngo twumve bekuza
In enduring settlement expansion, intimidation, arbitrary violence,
baracyari kuri n'ubu
and
byanditse
detention,
titre
and
yanditse ko ari kuri
demolitions of
Congo ariko ntabwo ariyo bariho. Kandi by the way nari ngize kubabwira, nari nakone ntangiye kubabwira ikintu kiri important, kuko Madame Thérèse Kayikwamba Wagner yavuze ko bavuze ko bari bugire conference de presse ako kanya bikimara kurangira. Donc ako kanya Security Council nirangira aragira conference de presse. Ibyo byose rero ndashaka kugira ngo nyibagezeho, ndayibagezaho twumve. N'ubushize yarabaye, ubwo araza kutubwira muri make bimwe bitari mu magambo magufi ibyahavugiwe cyangwa se ibibazo bamubaza, natwe tukaba dushobora kubyumviramo. Ibyo byose ntabwo biriwe biri kuri iyi site, nicyo kibazo. Ntabwo biriwe kuri iyi site ya ONI, bishobora kuba biri kuri site ya biri kuri yenda kuri presidence cyangwa se kuri MOFA, kuri Minisiteri y'Ububanyi n'Amahanga ya Kongo. So inama iracyateganyijwe, ahubwo noneho ntabwo, okay, reka ndebe. Iracyateganyijwe ku isaha ya 9:00, iracyari kuri 9:15. Okay, nuko uramutse uyishyizeho hahita haza iriya hearing ihari.
UNRWA's know-how, capabilities, and experience is unmatched. So is the level of trust the agency enjoys with Palestine refugees. No other agency can navigate the field as they...
Baracyari kuri Palestine, ubwo nibaza kuri Congo turi bugaruke, hanyuma ndi bugaruke muri live studio, hanyuma mbabwire nako nyibashyirireho. So nabarekuriye abantu bose n'abatari subscribers kugira ngo mubashe gukora commentaire, ariko nongere mbibutse mukore commentaire mu bwubahane, kuko mu bwubahane. Mva rero reka mbabwire updates. Nanababwiye ninjoro yuko hari imijyi yari nako uduce tunitwane twa Goma turi mu maboko ya FRDC, hari utwo baje kwamburwamo nyuma y'uburiganya bo mu rwego rwo hejuru. Mu gitondo MONUSCO yari yabuze uburyo itwara abakozi bayo kugira ngo bave Goma, noneho baza gusaba yuko habaho agahenge, kugira ngo mumbabarire, bavuga ko harimo agahenge, basaba agahenge nako mubare. Hari umuntu wari utudistractinze aha ngaha, nagira ngo biratangiye, ntabwo baratangira, kuko ndashaka kugira ngo dutangirane nayo, ariko birumvikana ko bibuze kongera kuvana bicaye hariya yenda hakaza abasimbizi. So muri icyo gihe habaye agahenge, impande zombi zabyemeye, uruhande rwa RDF na M23 ndetse n'uruhande rwa Congo barabyemera, kubera ko ni ku bijyanye niko amategeko yenda abiteganya. So muri ako gahenge, mbere gatoya yuko karangira, M23 batangira nyine ko icyo gihe nta masasu yavugaga, batangira gupatronga hafi y'ikibuga, bari hafi y'ikibuga cya Goma. Ibyo ni ukuri na Kakatindo. Iya makuru ahari nonaha ntaramenya neza ikibazo kirimo kuba muri Goma nonaha ntabwo nzi niba bifitanye isano n'ibintu babwiye Kagame, ntabwo mbizi. Icyo nzi cyo nuko bariho bavuga ko abasirikare ba M23 bari muri ka Katindo batangiye hashize iminota 30 batangiye kuvamo ngo berekeza Sake n'amaguru. Ntabwo ayo makuru urabona ko ninjiye aha, ntabwo yari yo gahunda yo kuba update, ndanga gusa kugira mutaba board mukaguma ahangaha ntagira icyo donc ntacyo mbabwira, ariko amakuru aravuga ko batangiye kugenda n'amaguru. Hari n'abavuga ko bahoze bahicira abantu benshi cyane. Hanyuma ariko baratekereza ko ari abasirikare bashobora kuba barafashwe matekwa. Mu gihe mu Rwanda bifotoza ngo boza ibisebe by'abantu, ahandi ho baravuga ko bashobora kuba bishe abantu bagera kuri 200 bari mu maboko yabo. Ibyo rero ntabwo nibyo ndiho mbona kuri ubu ngubu, ariko sindabitohoza neza, mureke nze gukomeza kubitohoza. Ikindi kintu gusa nababwira nuko reka mwabonye ibendera cyangwa se akavideo bavuga ngo ni ibendera ry'umweru ngo ba South African ngo bariho ngo bamanika amaboko. So ikintu rero naje kumenya nako ntabwo naje kumenya South African forces zabisobanuye igihe bashyiraga ibendera ry'umweru. Nibyo koko barishyizeho, ntabwo ari Photoshop nkuko yenda nanjye nabanje kubitekereza, ariko ntabwo n'amasezerano bari bamaze kugirana n'amasezerano bari bamaze kugirana na M23 bavuga ko bashaka yuko baza gufata mayiti zabo. Donc wumva ukuntu leta y'u Rwanda barasaze, bo ubwabo. Reka nkabahe nako mukarebe, bo ubwabo basabye, barabahamagara babwira ati muze mufate mayiti zanyu, abantu banyu twabishe, ariko turashaka ko mwaza mugafata abantu banyu. Noneho kugira ngo abo ba M23 bataza kugira ngo bataza yenda bakatekereza ko bari bubarase, so barabwira ati muze turashyiraho ibendera, noneho mumenye ko nta kibazo. Noneho rero reka nze mbahe iyi video kuko Kigali iteye ubwoba. Abantu ba Kigali batunzwe n'ibinyoma, batunzwe na propagande gusa. So ngiyi rero iyi foto mwese mwagiye mubona.
So sarenda kati amcha ketwe. Only kwa batile white flag. Bayutlile bafana bapata musu.
Okay, ahangaha ni hamwe. Noneho ndagira mbabwire ko iyo yaje gusobanurwa uyu munsi. Rero ndagenda ncekinga, murabona ko ndagira ngo okay, ngo bari hafi, hasigaye umuntu umwe gusa, hanyuma tugatangira.
Bayutlile bafana bapata musu.
Okay, reka mbahe iri tangazo rya South African National Defense Forces basobanuye iby'iyi South African National Defense Forces basobanuye what? Ntabwo ari byo ahangaha, muraza kumbabarira gatoya. Okay, here we go. Ibi ni bya bindi bandika babwira ko ibyo ko bazakomeza gufasha Okay, here we go. Ngiyi rero iyo dosiye bavugaga. Donc itangazo riravuga ko turashaka gusobanura ibinyoma byuzuye muri iyi video mwagiye mubona. Icya kabiri baravuga ko ibyo mugaragaza barasoma nihuta kugira ngo iriya nama itaducika, ko biriya mwabonye iriya foto mwabonye bazamura ibendera ni ibiganiro bagiranye hamwe n'impande ebyiri zarwanaga, noneho bumvikana ko habaho agahenge hagati ya M23 kugira ngo baze twumvikanye na M23 kugira ngo baze bafate abapfu babo, abantu babo bapfuye ndetse n'abakomeretse hafi y'ikigo cyacu. Igihe bagiteye urumva barahashiriye, so barababwira ati ubwo rero icyo gihe n'abariko baravuga bati nibaza natwe turajya kuvura abacu. Ibyo rero ati ni ibintu bisanzwe mu ntambara. So ibyo rero baravuga bati abantu babibonye ntimukangwe n'ibyo bavuze cyangwa n'ibyo bari kuba kugenda babyitirira, ukuri nuko nguko. Mwabyumvise rero ko kiriya ni ikinyoma binyoma bya RDF, ariko njyewe ndibo sinajya kujya ari jyewe ujya kubishyira hanze ngo ntangire publie amafoto nkariya, kandi ubona noneho baraje bise biduha umucyo ku bintu bikomeje kubera i Kigali cyangwa za Kanombe. Urumva ko barabwiye ati ku kigo cyacu barahateye abahaguye. Urumva rero turaza nibo twababwiye baze batoragure imirambo yabo ayitware. Nubwo natwe twarabyumvikanye, natwe tugira ibyo tubasaba, turabwira ati natwe turashaka kujya ku bitaro kugira ngo dufashe abacu, kuko nabo bashaka gufata ababo babajyane ku bitaro, aho bavuga ko babajyanye ku bitaro bivura inkomere. Ngibyo rero niyo flag. Ntabwo igihugu nka South Africa aricyo cyavuga ngo cyabeshye. Ababeshyi turabazi, abanyabinyoma turabazi, ni Kigali of course. Nibo bantu batagira isoni, batunzwe n'ikinyoma, bashobora no kubirarira rwose. Hanyuma mu gihe tugitegereje, hari umuntu wari umbwiye ati Jean Paul dutegoreze ibintu byabeye i Kinshasa ngo kubera byo gutwika ama ambasade. Ntabwo ari ukubabe, ntabwo ari ugutohoza, ntabwo nkeneye gutohoza kubera yuko byabaye. Nimukangwe nuko ntarimo kuvuga ku bijyanye na updates, amasaha yazo murayazi, nimugoroba turi kumwe amasaha ya nijoro, ariko aha nagira gusa ngo mbabwire nako twatuje tugiye kumva Security Council, ariko kubera itaratangira nyine urumva biba ngombwa ko mvuga mu magambo makeya ibyo mwiriwe mubona. Ndetse yenda mbere yo kumbashyiraho kuri ibyo bya Kinshasa nuko ahangaha ni muri European Union barimo berekana uburyarya bwa bamwe baburimo, bavuga icyo bategereje, ariko ntabwo ibi ngibi nshaka kubashyiraho. Ndashaka kubabwira ibi. Ubudage babwira u Rwanda ko ibiganiro byo kuganira ku mfashanyo inama bajya bagira kureba imfashanyo, ibyo babaha, ibyo aho bongera imbaraga hakoze hatya, byari biteganyije ko muri February. Nta bikibaye. Bababwiye amakuru naya, bababwiye ko inama n'u Rwanda itakibaye kubera intambara yo muri Congo. Sinzi niba bifitanye isano n'abasirikare numvise batangiye gusohoka, ariko Kagame ashobora kuba byamuvangiye. So bavuze rero ko bifitanye bavuze nako ko kutaba bazabaha iyo mfashanyo cyangwa batazaganira kuri izo mfashanyo ziteganyijwe, bityo rero kandi ko bifitanye isano na biriya ntambara barimo. Rero ndagira ngo ndebe ko batangiye. Okay, oya ntabwo baratangira. Bifitanye isano n'iyo n'intambara ya Congo. Kandi urumva ko Kagame ubukene arimo n'ibindi byose mu by'ukuri ubwo nibwo atangiye kureba realite y'ibintu. Nababwiye ni Kagame yibashije ko gusoma impyisi ari byiza, ariko agiye kureba ingaruka zabyo. Okay, inama iratangiye. Ibya Kinshasa turaza kubigarukaho. Ndibaza ko mwahoze mureba, aho niho amabye byabaye rwose. no kuzisahura. Reka twumve ibya Kongo.
They can, and therefore UNRWA is a vital partner for any agency as they can.
Okay, barimo baricara.
Hi, MONUSCO, they're waiting for you to speak.
Ngo bategereje ko MONUSCO ivuga, ngo bategereje ko MONUSCO ivuga. MONUSCO igomba kuba iri muri, ubwo tugiye gufata na briefing noneho na update nziza. MONUSCO iri Goma bagiye kutubwira, ariko barababwiye bati MONUSCO, we are waiting.
Thank you, President. We apologize deeply for these technical difficulties. Can you hear me?
You have the floor, Madam.
Thank you. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, Madam Minister of State, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Permanent Representative of the Republic of Rwanda, and other distinguished ambassadors and representatives. Thank you for convening an emergency meeting of the Security Council to follow up on the situation in Goma. Allow me to share with you our understanding of the current situation and the implications for MONUSCO. The escalating clashes in eastern DRC have resulted in massive displacement. More than 178,000 people fled Kalehe territory when the M23 took over Minova, with more than 34,000 of them seeking refuge in already overcrowded existing IDP sites in and around Goma. This surge has exacerbated an already dire humanitarian situation and also a protection situation, overwhelming Goma's infrastructure and compounding challenges related to water, electricity, and medical services. Despite the deliberations and the appeal by member states at the Emergency Security Council meeting on 26 January, the M23 RDF launched an attack on Goma using heavy direct and indirect fire within hours after the conclusion of the Security Council meeting. These attacks continue to ravage the city, killing, injuring, traumatizing, and displacing civilians and exacerbating the crisis. In accordance with its obligations under international humanitarian law, during the last few days, MONUSCO has received a large number of people seeking refuge, including officials and various elements who have surrendered their arms, which underscores once again the critical role of peacekeeping in such a volatile environment. The mission's human rights component also continues to receive requests for individual protection measures from human rights defenders and civil society organizations, and is working internally and with external partners to ensure their safety. However, MONUSCO's bases are not able to accommodate the large number of surrendering elements and civilians seeking refuge. Moreover, our bases are not safe themselves. 2 mortars fell in MONUSCO bases and compounds in the last 3 days, as well as countless bullets. Installations of former police unit staff in Jambar camp have been destroyed and burned. MONUSCO is storing voluntarily relinquished or abandoned weapons in accordance with international standards. MONUSCO is taking concrete steps to secure these weapons surrendered by various fighting elements to avoid any possible scenario where the mission could be put under pressure to hand over those weapons to any group. Casualty evacuation efforts remain a significant challenge. During the fighting in Sake, which began 4 days ago, peacekeepers were seriously injured. we continue to do our utmost to ensure timely evacuation of injured peacekeepers and other casualties to a level 3 hospital in Goma, despite continuing challenges. The fighting of the past week has also severely hampered supply convoys and consumed many resources held by MONUSCO's units. Damage to camps, including water tanks, generators, and vehicles, has further exacerbated the situation. Many troops are now running out of critical equipment, especially water, food, medical supplies, and blood. In some camps, fuel shortages have rendered generators inoperable, affecting communications equipment. In addition, a significant number of non-combatants have sought refuge in MONUSCO's camps in need of food, water, and medical care, further straining already limited supplies. The MONUSCO warehouse at the airport has been looted, further depleting supplies. The courthouse in Goma has been looted, and I can continue with this list. The proliferation of weapons in Goma poses a significant risk as combatants blend into the civilian population and abandoned military depots are looted by civilians. The mass influx of internally displaced persons without shelter, the separation of families, the proliferation of armed elements, and the escape of prisoners following a breakout from Goma prison increase the vulnerability of women and children to sexual and gender-based violence. Therefore, in line with the appeal of the Bishop of Goma, we call on all parties and the population to guarantee the protection of life and access to basic services for all and to prevent sexual violence. Armed clashes in Masisi, Rutshuru, and Nyiragongo continue to result in civilian casualties and displacements, further escalating the humanitarian crisis. Electricity and water supplies remain disrupted in Goma, and medical facilities are completely overwhelmed. Due to the intensity of the ongoing combat and the proximity of the front lines, humanitarian operations have been suspended or readjusted. Immediate action is required to alleviate the suffering of civilians and enable life-saving humanitarian efforts to proceed. Moreover, ethnically motivated attacks in a region with a very sensitive history need to be taken seriously. In the past 4 days, the Human Rights Office has documented at least one case of ethnically motivated lynching in an IDP site in Goma, as well as physical and verbal violence against journalists in Goma, all due to their perceived ethnic identity. In light of the ongoing crisis, we urgently require the end of jamming and spoofing, as well as the establishment of humanitarian corridors between Goma, Minova, and Bukavu. This will allow the resupply of essential items, the rotation of humanitarian staff, and the safe movement of civilians. We also appeal for the establishment of high-level diplomatic channels to ensure that critical airports, border points, and humanitarian access routes are reopened without delay. We stress that military action cannot resolve this conflict. It is imperative that all parties cease hostilities and commit to political dialogue in order to prevent further civilian suffering. Resuming the Luanda process is of the utmost urgency to ensure a path towards de-escalation and to avert the looming threat of a third Congo war. We remind all parties of their obligation to uphold international humanitarian law and stress that attacks on United Nations peacekeepers may constitute war crimes. The degree of suffering that the population in Goma and its environments is enduring is truly unimaginable. Let us please draw on our humanity and do our utmost to bring an immediate end to such levels of violence and suffering. In conclusion, the situation in Goma requires urgent and coordinated international action. Despite the significant challenges, MONUSCO continues to play a vital role in this crisis in the Eastern DRC and has proven to be a beacon for myriad vulnerable groups seeking protection. However, the mission is challenged in ensuring the safety of its staff and premises, which has been severely impacted by the heavy direct and indirect fire used in these last few days, and to address the logistical, human rights, and humanitarian challenges we are all facing to ensure the mission's continued effectiveness. We call on all parties to prioritize the protection of civilians, open humanitarian corridors, and work towards a sustainable and peaceful resolution of the conflict. I thank you very much.
I thank Ms. Viviane van de Peer for the statement. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements. And I give the floor to the representative of France.
Mr. President, I wish to thank the Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary General for her briefing. I welcome here among us the Minister of Foreign Affairs for the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The Security Council is meeting once again due to the sustained deterioration of the situation in North Kivu. As we speak, M23 is taking control of Goma with the active support of Rwanda. That must set alarm bells ringing for this council, as it did 12 years ago. The risk of regional spillover is real. The seizure of Goma brings with it major risks for the security of civilians and prompts the displacement of hundreds of thousands of people. It is vital to put an end to that situation. France fervently condemns this offensive. M23 must immediately cease the offensive and withdraw from territories over which it has seized control. Support for armed groups by all parties must stop. Our priority must be renewed support for a ceasefire and the resumption of dialogue. There is no military solution to this conflict. France reaffirms its solidarity with the Democratic Republic of the Congo and its unwavering commitment to upholding the DRC's territorial integrity and sovereignty. Here and elsewhere, compliance with the UN Charter is the order of the day. France continues its engagement at the highest level in order to resume a political process. We hail regional mobilization in this regard, and we hope that the African Union PSC meeting today and the EAC summit tomorrow will foster progress towards a sustainable, lasting peace. Dialogue, which has been initiated within the Luanda and Nairobi process, must resume as a matter of urgency. France supports these regional processes and will call upon parties to uphold their commitments entered into within the Luanda process. These are as follows: the withdrawal of Rwandan troops from Congolese territory and the implementation of the plan to dismantle the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, the FDLR. Finally, France wishes to forcefully reaffirm its support for MONUSCO. MONUSCO's mandate was unanimously renewed on the 20th of December. We condemn attacks waged by M23 against MONUSCO. These attacks have claimed the lives of several blue helmets in recent days. We convey our condolences to their family members. Personnel and undertakings of the United Nations must be respected. Attacks against blue helmets, civilians and humanitarian personnel are liable to constitute war crimes. Comprehensive humanitarian access must be guaranteed. Violations of IHL and human rights must be condemned. France once again condemns the deployment of surface-to-air missiles and the scrambling of GPS signals in areas under M23 control with the direct support of the Rwanda Defense Force. MONUSCO must be able to continue to do its work to protect civilians. The situation in Goma has major humanitarian and political ramifications. We will ensure that this council remains fully mobilized in view of just how grave this situation is. I thank you.
I thank the representative of France for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, thank you for convening this emergency meeting of the Security Council. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the A3+ members, Algeria, Guyana, Somalia, and my own country, Sierra Leone. At the outset, we pay tribute to the brave peacekeepers, MONUSCO personnel, and other UN staff who are risking their lives in pursuit of peace and the protection of civilians in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. We also honor those peacekeepers and Sami DRC personnel who have made the ultimate sacrifice in service of peace. Our deepest condolences go to their families and to the government and people of South Africa, Malawi, and Uruguay. We express our gratitude to Ms. Vivian van der Peer, Deputy Special Representative for Protection and Operations in MONUSCO, for a comprehensive briefing on the dire situation on the ground. We also welcome the participation of Her Excellency Therese Kaikwamba Wagner, State Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of the DRC, as well as the representatives of all other participating states in this meeting. Mr. President, we commend the swift convening of this emergency meeting. In less than 72 hours, the Security Council has convened for a second time to address the rapidly evolving situation in Eastern DRC. The A3+ is deeply concerned about the volatility of the situation, the ongoing conflict, and the resulting stalemate, which present a high risk of a broader regional conflict. We have listened attentively to Ms. van der Peer's briefing, and it is clear that the people of Goma, and indeed the wider Congolese population, deserve more than a temporary cessation of the M23/AFC offensive. They need the guns to be silent through a comprehensive political process that will not only end their suffering but also guarantee respect for the DRC's sovereignty and territorial integrity. In this regard, we make the following point. First, we call for an immediate de-escalation of the tension and a restoration of calm in Goma. We urge the M23-AFC to cease its advances and for all parties to exercise the utmost restraint to ensure the protection of civilians. Given the unpredictable and volatile nature of the situation in Goma and surrounding areas, it is imperative that all efforts, whether from MONUSCO or other actors, focus on safeguarding the population from harm. Given Goma's critical role in facilitating access to the region, all efforts to protect civilians must also address the need for humanitarian access, as well as the safety and security of UN peacekeepers and Sami DRC personnel. The M23/AFC must refrain from obstructing humanitarian assistance or closing humanitarian corridors. The A3+ stresses the critical need for uninterrupted aid to reach the most vulnerable and reminds all parties of their obligations under international humanitarian law to protect civilian lives and ensure the delivery of aid to those in need. Second, as we have stated before, the situation in Eastern DRC will not be resolved through military means. It requires a political solution, supported by diplomacy and regional cooperation. Since our last meeting on Sunday, we have seen significant African diplomatic efforts to support the Congolese people and encourage both the DRC and Rwanda to reach a mutually acceptable resolution. We recognize the leadership of President William Ruto of Kenya, who has called for an East African Community meeting that will take place in the coming hours. Earlier today, the African Union Peace and Security Council convened an emergency ministerial meeting in Addis Ababa. These regional efforts are commendable, but what is needed now is the commitment of both Rwanda and the DRC to engage in direct negotiations under the Luanda process in good faith with the support of all these initiatives to bring a prompt resolution to the situation in Goma. We strongly call on both Rwanda and DRC to fully engage under the Luanda process, which is being led by the African Union's designated mediator, His Excellency João Lourenço, President of Angola, to resolve the outstanding issues between them. We are aware that the longer this deadlock persists, the greater the risk of further escalation, which will become increasingly difficult to contain. If the political leadership of Rwanda and the DRC can engage in direct talks, there is hope for delivering much-needed relief to the Congolese people. Third, to achieve a lasting solution that fully respects the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC, while also addressing Rwanda's security concerns. It is critical for both countries to fully implement their commitment under the Luanda process. The A3+ remain convinced that the Luanda process offers the best pathway to peace in the DRC. Through this process, a ceasefire agreement was reached, though regrettably breached, along with an agreement on a harmonized plan, reinforced ad hoc verification mechanism, and a comprehensive concept of operations. The A3+ calls on all parties to honor their commitment under the Luanda process. Given the unfortunate development on the ground, and in pursuit of peace and stability in the DRC and the wider region, the A3+ urges the government of Rwanda to withdraw its troops from DRC territories without preconditions and without delay, and to cease its reported support to the M23 AFC. Similarly, we urge the government of the DRC to sever its ties with FDLR and to implement its commitment to neutralize this group. We also regret that President Lourenço of Angola had no choice but to evacuate members of the reinforced ad hoc verification mechanism due to the untenable security situation in Eastern DRC. While the ceasefire agreement has been violated, the mechanism remains incomplete and has not been fully operationalized. Fourth, the natural wealth of the DRC must translate into prosperity for its people. All actors, both local and external, who continue to illegally exploit the country's resources and fuel the conflict must be held accountable. Mr. President, the A3+ expresses deep concern and regret over the reported attacks on embassies in Kinshasa amidst protests relating to the M23 AFC rebel group's offensive in Eastern DRC. These acts against diplomatic missions and their personnel violate international law. As we acknowledge the legitimate concerns of the Congolese people regarding the security situation in Eastern DRC and the activities of the M23 rebel group, we call for the protection of diplomatic missions and strongly urge all parties to refrain from violence, respect diplomatic norms, and exercise restraint. Peaceful and constructive engagement remains the most effective way to address these pressing issues. In closing, we are all well aware of the critical importance of Goma to the Congolese people. Goma is the heart of the DRC. Allowing this vital city to remain under the control of a rebel group sends a disturbing message about the ability or willingness of the international community to prevent threats to international peace and security from flourishing. It is a moral imperative for all actors, including this Council, to act decisively to address the unfolding situation in Goma and to tackle the structural root causes of this conflict. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. Let me start by thanking DSOSG Van der Peer for briefing us today. And I welcome the participation of DRC Foreign Minister Wagner, alongside other representatives from the region and troop-contributing countries. President, the UK is deeply alarmed by the events that have unfolded in Eastern DRC. Since we met on Sunday, M23, with support from the Rwandan Defence Forces, have closed in on Goma. M23 have declared that it is now under their control. The humanitarian impacts are dire. The advances have displaced close to 1 million people in North and South Kivu. Civilian casualties are rising. Hundreds of thousands of people who have already fled from M23's advances, many of them several times before, are now on the move again, with virtually nowhere safe to go? How many times must they pack up their lives and flee? The cycle must end. The UK is also deeply concerned by the limited ability of humanitarian actors to get help to those who need it. Key humanitarian routes, land, water and air, are closed, and hospitals are overcrowded, with staff risking their own lives to provide emergency assistance. More than 800,000 people in the area who were prioritised for support may no longer receive vital food and nutritional assistance. We call on the parties not to obstruct the vital services that humanitarians are providing, and to cease hostilities and uphold the protection of humanitarian workers, as required in international humanitarian law. We also urge all parties to consider essential humanitarian corridors to allow the resupply and delivery of essential life-saving items and the freedom and safe movement of civilians and humanitarian actors. President, the UK is also deeply concerned by the continued endangering of peacekeepers' lives. On Sunday, I expressed my condolences to the families of the 13 who'd already been killed. Since then, 4 more peacekeepers have tragically been killed. We urge an immediate end to this violence. We commend the leadership of MONUSCO, your courage under fire, and we thank you for the vital work of the mission. Finally, President, the UK's Foreign Secretary and Minister for Africa have spoken with Rwanda at the highest levels, as well as with wider partners in the region, and we have made clear that there can be no military solution. We urge all parties to cease hostilities and return to diplomatic talks immediately without preconditions. We remain committed to ensuring this Council takes the necessary action to support an end to this conflict. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we'd like to thank the Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary General, Vivian van der Peer, for her briefing. We welcome to the meeting the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Teresa Vanga, and the representative of the other countries who've requested the floor under Rule 37. Distinguished colleagues, 2 days ago we met in this chamber and discussed the worrisome developments in the situation in the eastern DRC. Over the past 48 hours, the situation has significantly deteriorated, especially with the seizure of Goma, where there are more than 1 million civilians located. Russia firmly condemns the actions of M23. We call for a swift cessation of hostilities and a withdrawal of the rebels of the illegal armed formation from the towns, villages and territory they have seized. We also urge external forces to cease their support for M23 and to recall their military units. There's a need without delay to resume the negotiation process in Luanda. We must not allow a spillover of the escalation which could threaten the lives of people on both sides of the border and is likely to turn into an interstate conflict on a regional scale. We are seriously concerned by the humanitarian repercussions of what's going on. In front of our very eyes, the already difficult situation in North Kivu is turning into an utter humanitarian disaster. Goma, de facto, is cut off from the outside world. This may have serious consequences for the inhabitants of the town and the IDPs who have fled there. Once again, we would like to express our condolences to the families of the civilian victims of the DRC, the UN peacekeepers, and the fallen SADC soldiers. We stand in solidarity with the governments of the DRC and those states who've lost their service personnel. We wish the speedy recovery. We'd like to underscore that Russia unequivocally condemns the attacks on peacekeepers. It's absolutely unacceptable. We firmly support the UN peacekeeping mission in the stabilization mission in the DRC, its leadership, and the Blue Helmets. We also condemn any attacks and acts of aggression regarding international diplomatic representation. Such actions have absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with peaceful demonstrations. We urge Kinshasa to ensure the protection of foreign missions and diplomatic staff, pursuant to the Vienna Convention and its international obligations. The violence in eastern DRC needs to stop. However, there's no military path to resolve this crisis. It is absolutely clear that this is only possible as a result of political agreements. We're convinced that the Luanda process remains the best forum where agreements can be reached. We carefully listened to the representative of Angola during the meeting of the Council on Sunday. Angola clearly stated that the only obstacle to preventing a signature of a reconciliation document between Kinshasa and Kigali was the issue of cessation of government interaction with the illegal armed formations, and primarily with the M23. Without settling the status of this group as part of the intra-Congolese dialogue, any attempts to improve the situation between the DRC and Rwanda will not bear lasting fruit. Here, there is an urgent need for the resumption of the Nairobi process and the pushing forward of similar regional initiatives. There's no alternative to this. Mr. President, attempts to settle the crisis will also not bear fruit if the countries of the Great Lakes region do not take decisive measures to combat the illegal exploitation and smuggling of natural resources, the lion's share of which, as we all know, come from the eastern DRC, which is beset by instability. There's a need for extra-regional players and large transnational corporations to review their relationship with the use of these resources because in their interest there's this ongoing illegal supply of blood minerals. These states have all instruments available to them to stop the hot phase, so to speak, of the conflict and to exert pressure on the parties so they return to negotiations. They must be harnessed to protect people's lives and to stop the suffering of hundreds of thousands of civilians. Unfortunately, we've all seen that the statement of the Council has not stopped the M23 and those who support this group from seizing Goma and continuing their hostilities. Russia, from its side, will do everything possible, including through here in the Council, to stop the escalation and to restore prospects for diplomatic settlement in the interest of stabilizing the situation in the eastern DRC. Thank you very much indeed.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, President. Thank you, DSRSG, Vivian van de Peer, for your briefing on the unacceptable events of the last 48 hours. The United States condemns the seizure of Goma and urges this Council to consider measures to halt the territorial advances by Rwandan troops and M23. We stand in firm support of the Congolese people and of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC, and urge Rwanda to respect the same. At the same time, we are watching with concern and deplore the destruction of diplomatic facilities in Kinshasa and call on the DRC government to respect its obligations to protect diplomatic premises and personnel. We call for an immediate ceasefire, an end to this fighting. Rwanda must withdraw troops from the DRC. Rwanda and the DRC must return to the negotiating table and work toward a sustainable, peaceful solution. We remain deeply concerned about the human rights abuses, displacement, and other impacts on Congolese civilians suffering the brunt of this fighting. Civilians, including the growing number of IDPs and refugees in Sake, Goma, and beyond, must be protected. More than ever, humanitarian actors must be allowed to operate freely and deliver life-saving aid. The rights of all Goma's inhabitants, including former combatants, must be respected. We are similarly concerned that M23's and Rwanda's ongoing advances are opening up a bloody new front to this conflict in South Kivu, which no longer benefits from the roles MONUSCO assumed in the past to protect civilians and facilitate humanitarian assistance. We must not allow this violence to spiral into a wider regional conflict, which would incur a horrific human toll. We mourn all the Congolese who have lost their lives in this fighting. We also extend heartfelt condolences to the countries and families of UN peacekeepers and Sami DRC troops lost during these attacks. We applaud MONUSCO for its commitment to protect civilians and the bravery and professionalism demonstrated by peacekeepers in recent weeks. As we have said before, Rwanda's support to M23 remains wholly at odds with its robust support to UN peacekeeping. Rwanda said on Sunday that it means no harm to MONUSCO, but 3 peacekeepers have been killed, with many more injured. Additionally, UN and humanitarian personnel, as well as civilians, are endangered by Rwanda's ongoing use of GPS interference and deployment of advanced weapons and systems. Hope is not lost. There is an end in sight to this fighting and a path for a regional dialogue, but the international community must act now. Those unwilling to return to the negotiating table must face a clear and unambiguous response from the Council. We must abandon the delusion of short-term military solutions and work instead toward a durable peace powered by regional economic arrangements for the Great Lakes' vast mineral wealth to ensure stability and prosperity for local populations. Addressing historical grievances, ending ethnic attacks, and other roots of this conflict must be done through a process that has clear incentives and unmistakable accountability. The international community has the tools in hand to end the fighting and build sustainable solutions to the Eastern DRC conflict. We must collectively marshal the will to leverage such tools, as the United States is fully prepared to do, or be prepared to accept unthinkable cost, measured in human lives. Indeed, as the United States observed at our briefing on Sunday, we will consider all the tools at our disposal in order to hold accountable those responsible for sustaining armed conflict, instability, and insecurity in the DRC. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, dear SRG Van der Peer, for your briefing on this serious and evolving situation. I welcome this presence of Her Excellency Foreign Minister Wagner at this meeting. Mr. President, just 2 days ago, this Council convened urgently to address the situation in Eastern DRC. We were briefed on the dramatic escalation of Goma on a knife's edge, of peacekeepers being killed and civilians fleeing. Today, the situation has continued to deteriorate. Let me be clear. Denmark strongly condemns the ongoing offensive by M23 with support of the Rwanda Defense Forces and the military presence of Rwanda in DRC. We demand that M23, supported by the RDF, immediately halt and reverse their territorial expansion and withdraw. We demand that Rwanda ceases its support to the M23 and that the DRC ceases its support to the FDLR. Colleagues, we've all seen the devastating images. Shelling and heavy artillery in the city center of Goma, civilians fleeing, overcrowded hospitals, and ongoing looting. Denmark is extremely concerned about the risk of urban conflict, as well as sexual violence following the influx of armed elements and the Goma prison escape. Likewise, we are deeply alarmed by the risk of attacks against human rights defenders who now fear individual persecution and ethnically motivated attacks. We also express our deep concern with the recent attacks on diplomatic missions in Kinshasa. This is unacceptable. Mr. President, against this dangerous and rapidly developing backdrop, allow me to highlight 4 key points. First, Denmark demands an immediate cessation of hostilities, as well as unhindered, rapid and safe humanitarian access to all populations in and around Goma. This includes open humanitarian corridors, open land borders, and airspace. This cannot be understated. In line with international humanitarian law, medical and humanitarian personnel must be protected, and their ability to provide life-saving care must be ensured. Parties must engage with the UN humanitarian actors for deconfliction purposes and allow trauma and specialized medical teams urgent access. Upholding IHL is not an option, it's an obligation. Second, Denmark firmly condemns any form of violence targeting civilians and objects indispensable to the survival of the civilian populations. We demand their immediate protection and the respect for human rights, regardless of ethnic group, gender, or age. Perpetrators of any attack against civilians must be held to account, no matter their rank or affiliation. Third, we express our full support to MONUSCO as it fulfills its critical mandate facing extremely difficult circumstances. We remind the parties that any involvement in attacks against MONUSCO peacekeepers may constitute a war crime and a basis for sanctioned designations pursuant to United Nations Security Council resolutions. Fourth, Mr. President, as we underlined just 2 days ago, there is no military solution to this conflict, only a political one. We urge DRC and Rwanda to immediately and in good faith fully re-engage and fully recommit to diplomatic talks in the regional peace processes in place. The Luanda and Nairobi processes are the means to solve this conflict. Colleagues, we are not here merely to request that the parties uphold their obligations under international law. When these obligations are consistently violated, it is incumbent upon us to consider all appropriate tools at the Council's disposal. Mr. President, to conclude, the people of the DRC deserve peace. The peoples of the Great Lake region deserve peace. As the UN body charged with the maintenance of international peace and security, this Council should act decisively in support of this goal. Count on Denmark's support. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank Algeria for convening this urgent meeting. We also thank Ms. van der Peer for her briefing. Mr. President, just 2 days ago, this Council condemned the advances of M23 and demanded that the offensive and advances towards Goma immediately stop. Unfortunately, the developments since then have only confirmed our fears. Mr. President, the M23's continued offensive, including the seizure of Goma, with support from Rwanda Defense Forces, is a clear threat to regional stability. We strongly condemn these actions. Slovenia renews its demand for the immediate ceasefire and the unconditional withdrawal of M23 from the occupied territories. The risk of this conflict escalating into a wider regional crisis must not be underestimated, and recent developments have only amplified these fears. Our message is clear. The violence must stop, and diplomacy must take the lead. Slovenia continues to call on Rwanda to fully withdraw its forces from the DRC territory in accordance with international law and to cease its support to M23. We strongly condemn the ongoing violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC. They must be respected. We also continue to call on the DRC to cease all cooperation with the FDLR and other armed groups. We are gravely alarmed by the escalating risks in Goma and its surroundings, with the risks of urban fighting and the use of heavy weapons in densely populated areas. There is no time to waste. Mr. President, this is yet another nightmare chapter in this ongoing conflict, forcing hundreds of thousands of civilians to flee, too many of them not for the first time. They are living in fear, they are hungry, they are exposed to vulnerabilities which are further intensified by the presence and influx of armed elements. Restoring and returning to an agreed ceasefire is imperative, but immediate measures are also needed to protect civilians, humanitarian and medical facilities, critical infrastructure, including electricity, water, and communication networks. Safe humanitarian corridors must enable aid delivery and civilian evacuations. Heavy weapons and troops must be withdrawn from the IDP sites. We cannot stress this enough. International humanitarian and human rights law must be upheld by all parties at all times. We call on both countries to exercise maximum restraint. We remain hopeful that strong African engagement through the African Union, the East African Community and the Luanda processes can help turn the tide through dialogue, and we commend these efforts. Strengthened by this Council, continued engagement and bilateral efforts, these actions highlight the value of complementing all paths to peace, and Slovenia fully supports them. We urge Rwanda and the DRC to heed calls for peace from the region and the wider international community, and especially those fleeing bullets and bombs, to de-escalate and re-engage in a diplomatic process. Mr. President, we strongly support MONUSCO and its vital mission to protect civilians and recall the need to ensure their safety and security. We unequivocally condemn all attacks and threats against MONUSCO personnel, humanitarian and medical workers who, even as we speak, continue to carry out their life-saving work under fire. In closing, Mr. President, let me express Slovenia's great concern over the attacks on diplomatic missions in Kinshasa. Any such actions are entirely unacceptable and a clear violation of international law. We call for the protection of diplomatic missions in strict accordance with the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President, for convening this emergency meeting following Sundays. I thank Deputy SRSG Van de Per for her sobering briefing. I welcome Minister Wagner of the DRC. At the outset, the Republic of Korea reaffirms its steadfast support for MONUSCO and the regional and sub-regional organizations for their tireless efforts in addressing this perilous crisis. We also reiterate our firm commitment to ensuring the safety and security of MONUSCO peacekeepers. At the same time, we strongly condemn the attacks on diplomatic missions in Kinshasa and urgently call for their immediate cessation. We urge the DRC government to fulfill its obligations under international law by ensuring the protection of all diplomatic missions within its territory. Mr. President, I would like to underscore 3 points today as we confront the devastating and fluid developments on the ground. First, we deeply regret that the unified call of the Security Council during Sunday's meeting, and along with the subsequent press statement, has been blatantly disregarded by the M23 and Rwanda. We demand that the M23 immediately halts its unjustifiable military actions in eastern DRC and withdraw from its offensive in Goma. Their reckless actions are forcing civilians to flee with no safe refuge, endangering hundreds of thousands of innocent lives. Equally critical, we urge Rwanda to refrain from further escalating the conflict. We must once again stress our urgent appeal to Rwanda to cease all forms of support to M23 and promptly withdraw any unauthorized military presence from DRC territory. These actions undermine the foundational principles of the UN Charter, including respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity. Second, the Security Council must consider all measures at its disposal to bring an end to this devastating conflict. The Council must deliver a more decisive and unequivocal message. In addition, concrete actions must be pursued to effectively influence the strategic calculations of the parties involved in the conflict. We must recall that it was a strong diplomatic pressure that stopped the M23 back in 2012. A thorough investigation into the attacks against the peacekeepers is also vital. The safety and security of UN peacekeepers is a top priority for the Security Council. All perpetrators of violations of international humanitarian and international human rights laws, including sexual and gender-based violence, must also be held accountable. Third, both the DRC and Rwanda must return to meaningful negotiations and fully honor their obligations under the Rwanda process. We reaffirm our full support for President Lourenço of Angola in his critical mediation efforts. We also look forward to the African Union Peace and Security Council playing a key role in exerting necessary pressure following its emergency ministerial meeting held this morning. Furthermore, we encourage sustained and coordinated pressure from all regional and international actors at the highest levels of government to help urgently de-escalate this conflict. In conclusion, Mr. President, the Security Council must take action. Most importantly, we must not lose sight of the innocent civilians who, even as we meet here today, are awaiting the Council's action. The Republic of Korea remains steadfast in its commitment to constructive engagement, working collectively to swiftly and decisively overturn the consequences of unlawful military actions. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, President. At the outset, President, I'd like to thank you for convening this emergency meeting. I thank DSRG Van der Berg for the briefing. I welcome the Foreign Minister, Kaykwamba of DRC, to the meeting today. Since Council's Sunday consideration of the situation in Eastern DRC, the ground situation has taken a nosedive. M23 overran Goma, the capital of North Kivu province, causing massive civilian displacement and increasing the risk of a greater conflict. The developments are deeply worrying. China reiterates our firm support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC and opposition to any violations of the UN Charter and international law. China demands that M23 to immediately cease all hostilities and withdraw from Goma and other occupied areas. China hopes that Rwanda attaches importance to the calls from SD Guterres and relevant African countries. Stop military support for M23 and immediately withdraw all its military forces from the territory of the DRC. We urge parties to the conflict to abide by international humanitarian law and to protect the security of civilians and civilian infrastructure. Meanwhile, the security of foreign nationals and institutions in DRC should be protected too. China once again strongly condemns M23's attacks against UN peacekeepers. We salute MONUSCO for sticking to its posts under extremely dangerous circumstances and support its continued activities, including protection of the civilians pursuant to the mandate of the Security Council. We reiterate that any attacks targeting UN peacekeepers are unacceptable and urge parties to refrain from any actions that may endanger peacekeeping camps and peacekeepers. President, it should be underscored that there is no military solution to the issue of Eastern DRC and that diplomatic negotiations are the only way out. China supports the leaders of Angola, South Africa, Kenya, among others, in conducting emergency communication with countries concerned, and welcome East African Community's announcement of a forthcoming emergency meeting. We call on Rwanda and the DRC to return to the track of diplomatic dialogue as soon as possible and to implement the mutual commitments made under the Luanda process, including commitments to neutralizing FDLR. We hope the two countries can actively respond to the mediation efforts of the international community and regional countries and maintain dialogue and negotiations to resolve concerns. At present, the situation in Eastern DRC is at a critical juncture fraught with peril. China supports the Security Council in keeping its unity, taking necessary actions to create favorable conditions to prevent the situation from worsening further and to push for a political settlement. I thank you.
I thank the representative of China for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
I thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we thank you for convening this meeting on this urgent topic. We thank Deputy SRSG Vivian van der Peer for her valuable briefing. We also welcome the participation of the Foreign Minister of the DRC in this meeting, as well as the permanent representatives of Rwanda, Uruguay, Angola, Guatemala, Zimbabwe, and Burundi. Mr. President, since we met on Sunday, the M23 has largely seems to be in control of Goma. Thousands of people are currently fleeing their homes, adding to the millions already internally displaced in eastern DRC. Many UN and other peacekeeping troops are still encountering mortar and small arms fire. 3 UN peacekeepers have lost their lives and 22 have been injured. Some DRC has also taken fatalities and casualties. We once again express our deepest condolences to the families of the fallen peacekeepers and pay tribute to their bravery, and especially those who died in the line of duty. I would like to make the following points. First, we strongly condemn M23's offensive on Goma. It must immediately stop its advance and vacate all territories it has occupied. We condemn the violations of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC. All foreign forces must be withdrawn from the territory of the DRC. Second, the M23 siege of Goma has grave humanitarian consequences. The UN Secretariat and other humanitarian actors, in consultations with the DRC, should urgently develop a plan for the protection of civilians, the handling of internally displaced people, and addressing the humanitarian crisis in eastern DRC. The M23 must not impede access for immediate, safe, and unhindered humanitarian aid and humanitarian personnel to the affected areas and to the affected people, including through humanitarian corridors. Third, we strongly condemn the continued attacks on the peacekeepers. Attacks on peacekeepers constitute war crimes, and those responsible for perpetrating, supporting, and sponsoring these attacks must be held accountable. At the same time, we deplore the attacks on diplomatic facilities in Kinshasa. We ask the UN Secretariat and MONUSCO, in consultations with the DRC, to urgently present an effective plan to ensure the safety and security of MONUSCO and other peacekeepers, including through the steps that they have already taken. Fourth, we stress that there is no military solution to the conflict in eastern DRC. We call on Rwanda and the DRC to cease hostilities and to immediately revive the Luanda process of dialogue under the mediatory leadership of President Lorenzo of Angola. The understandings reached under this process, that is the neutralization of the FDLR and the withdrawal of Rwandan forces from DRC, should be maintained and implemented even as the challenge posed by the M23 is confronted and resolved. We hope that the reconciliation within DRC will be achieved, especially through the Nairobi process. We also extend our full support to the Special Envoy for the Great Lakes region in promoting dialogue to resolve the conflict in eastern DRC. Fifth, we appreciate the communiqué issued today by the African Peace and Security Council on the situation in DRC, in eastern DRC. African institutions would no doubt have to play a very important role in bringing the decades-old conflict to an end in accordance with the call for African solutions to African problems and silencing the guns. Sixth, the Security Council and the Secretary General will need to evaluate the future role of MONUSCO in the evolving circumstances in Eastern DRC. In our view, the mission must be maintained and its mandate reviewed and adapted to respond to the new circumstances and operating environment. The mission will need to be adequately reinforced and equipped to discharge its current or modified mandate. Finally, Mr. President, we once again call to address the issue of the illegal exploitation of the DRC's natural resources, which is the root cause of this conflict. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank Ms. Van der Per, Deputy SRSG, for briefing us on this urgent meeting today and commend the courage of all of MONUSCO's personnel in these very difficult circumstances. I would also like to welcome the participation of the Honourable Foreign Minister of the Democratic Republic of the Congo in our meeting. Mr. President, allow me to emphasize 4 key points. First, we strongly condemn the capture of the town of Sake on January 23rd and the invasion of Goma on January 27th by M23. We reiterate that the sovereignty, unity and territorial integrity of the DRC must be fully respected. The presence of Rwandan troops on the territory of DRC and the support to the M23, as also stated by the Secretary General on January 26, are very concerning and are strongly condemned. We call on Rwanda to cease its support to the M23 and to withdraw its forces now. Second, we call for urgent de-escalation, and we stress that it is more imperative than ever that particularly Rwanda and DRC commit to the ceasefire as agreed last August, re-engage in the political dialogue, and implement all decisions and commitments agreed under the Luanda process. Greece will continue to support African-led initiatives and welcomes the emergency ministerial session on the conflict in Eastern DRC convened today by the African Union Peace and Security Council and the upcoming meeting of SADC tomorrow. We call DRC and Rwanda to return immediately to the table of negotiations. Third, we are deeply concerned about the grave humanitarian security consequences of the M23 offensive in North Kivu. All parties must respect international humanitarian law and ensure unrestricted humanitarian access. We strongly condemn all forms of human rights violations, abuses, violence against civilians, sex and gender-based violence in particular. Fourth, we reiterate our full support to MONUSCO, which is acting within its mandate and doing critical work in the DRC, including in the area of Goma, stress a strong commitment to the safety and security of its peacekeepers, condemns the attacks committed against personnel, and offer condolences to the families and government of the deceased peacekeepers. MONUSCO must be granted full access and freedom of movement to effectively fulfill its mandate and address urgent needs. The protection of civilians and humanitarian personnel must remain an absolute priority. Attacks against peacekeepers may constitute potential war crimes, and those attacks against MONUSCO peacekeepers form also a basis for potential sanction designations. Mr. President, we stand ready to consider any further engagement of this Council as unnecessary. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. President. We warmly welcome the Deputy Special Representative for MONUSCO, Ms. Viviane Van der Per. We thank her for her briefing. We also welcome the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Her Excellency Ms. Therese Kaikwamba-Wagner of the DRC. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Security Council, Panama expresses its grave concern at the alarming situation currently playing out in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. In recent days, we have witnessed an escalation of violence which has culminated in M23's entry into the city of Goma, that with the support of the Rwanda Defense Force. This was reported on by the group of experts. That offensive unleashed a humanitarian crisis of devastating proportions. Thousands of civilians have been forced to flee their homes, seeking refuge in unsafe, volatile conditions, and they are now facing the suspension of essential basic services. The suspension of these services has left the civilian population extremely vulnerable. The lack of access to drinking water, electricity, healthcare, and other core services is worsening the suffering of the displaced persons as well as local residents. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees expressed his grave concern at the worsening of the violence and the humanitarian crisis in eastern DRC. He indicated that the number of internally displaced persons has increased by more than 400,000 this year alone. The Republic of Panama reiterates its repudiation of any form of violence which undermines the security and physical integrity of the civilian population. We issue an urgent appeal to all parties involved to cease hostilities immediately and to adhere to international humanitarian law. We fully support the appeal issued by UN entities for the authorization of temporary humanitarian pauses in critical areas, as well as for the establishment of safe and effective humanitarian corridors. Moreover, we reiterate our staunch support for the invaluable work done by MONUSCO. MONUSCO's commitment to peace and security in the region is beyond doubt. We recognize the complex challenges facing the mission in a highly unstable environment, and we deeply appreciate the mission's tireless efforts to protect civilians and to strengthen institutions of the rule of law. Mr. President, on Sunday during the emergency meeting, Panama expressed its solidarity with and support for the Blue Helmets and their families. It is unacceptable that today, once again, we find ourselves in the terrible situation of having to once again convey our deepest condolences following the loss of 4 more lives on the front lines. We recognise efforts made at a regional level that were made to address this crisis. In particular, we point to the initiative taken by the President of Kenya, William Ruto. He has convened for tomorrow an emergency meeting of the EAC, and we recognise what's been done by the AU Peace and Security Council. Both initiatives have the goal of protecting civilians and of fostering candid dialogue between the parties to the conflict. Ladies and gentlemen, we are witnessing the escalation of this conflict in real time. Now is the time for this Council to take decisive action in order to guarantee unfettered access to humanitarian aid and to restore basic services in areas affected. The people of the DRC must receive the international community's support in line with the principles of the UN Charter to avoid a regional conflagration. We reaffirm our tireless commitment to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We demand that M23 and the Rwanda Defense Force immediately cease their advancement, and we demand that they move to complete withdrawal, fully respecting the ceasefire agreement and the mediation processes underway. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Panama for the statement. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Therese Kaikwamba Wagner, State Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and Francophonie of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. You have the floor, Madame.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, on behalf of the government and people of the Democratic Republic of Congo, I would like to convey my thanks for convening this second meeting in 48 hours on the security situation in my country. I would also like to commend the commitment of the Algerian presidency of the Council and the ongoing efforts of those who, despite strong headwinds, are striving unfailingly for international peace and security. Before I continue, I would like to commend the ultimate sacrifice made over the past 48 hours by peacekeepers of MONUSCO and SAMI DRC in the DRC. I would also like to pay tribute to the courage and resilience of the Congolese armed forces, and I'd like to pay tribute to those Congolese civilians who have been victim of the merciless attack by Rwanda. We, the Democratic Republic of Congo, recognize also the losses amongst Rwandan soldiers during the clashes. Whilst Rwanda is obstinately insisting on its false narrative, claiming that it is not conducting a war in the DRC, this stance is very costly to the families of hundreds of Rwandan soldiers who died in this senseless war. Even if their own country refuses to recognize them, to pay tribute to them, or to allow their families the right to mourn their losses, we, the Democratic Republic of Congo, are well aware that war crosses all borders. We recognize that the madness that Kigali has plunged us into has caused victims everywhere. As regard the protests this morning in Kinshasa, here I would like to reassure our partners that the government of the DRC has taken all necessary measures to ensure the protection of the accredited diplomatic missions in the Democratic Republic of Congo. These sincerely regrettable incidents in no way regret the constant commitment of our country to the respect for international law and to the principles that govern diplomatic relations. Today, we are here once again, meeting in less than 48 hours. So we must absolutely be brave enough to ask ourselves this question. What specific impact did the press statement of the Security Council of the 26th of January actually have? Mr. President, in Goma, the Congolese armed forces, supported by MONUSCO and SADC troops, continue to fight courageously. However, this heroic, determined defense cannot mask the scale of the tragedy. Once again, the peacekeepers, including 4 South African SAMI-DRC soldiers, have paid the ultimate price for their determination. These victims are nothing less than the result of criminal acts that constitute crimes against humanity and war crimes perpetrated by the RDF in complete impunity and with the silence of this council. Ladies and gentlemen, I would allow to engage in a brief aside. One of the 4 brave South African blue helmets who died in Goma did not die directly in the fighting, but he succumbed to his injuries. This tragedy illustrates tragically the current reality. Lives are lost in a besieged town, cut off from electricity, water, and escape routes. This is the fate today of millions of people in Goma, trapped without access to water, electricity, food, or safety. This is a tragedy shared by Congolese citizens, as well as by millions, or thousands rather, of peacekeepers and humanitarian workers who are trapped. I would just like to reiterate the poignant words of the Special Representative Bintou Keita 2 days ago. We're trapped. The past 24 hours have seen more than 100 patients taken to the ICRC health centers, and the humanitarian situation continues to deteriorate, with more than 500,000 new IDPs in the North and South Kivu provinces in January alone. The Rwanda Defense Forces and their stooges in the M23 have breached our borders. They've occupied our towns and villages, chased out our fellow citizens from their homes, and set up a parallel administration in violation of international law and in violation of the clear stance of this council. What more will Rwanda do to continue to abuse your respect and your authority? What international instrument must it violate for the Council to finally take necessary measures against Kigali? From the United Nations Charter to international humanitarian law to human rights, and also the Luanda and Nairobi peace processes, Rwanda has proven time and again that your statements mean absolutely nothing to it. The 4th of August 2024 ceasefire was just a pipe dream, and if it is allowed to ignore your warnings of the 26th of January, it has done so. It has now bombed hospitals and homes in Goma. On the 26th of January, Rwanda, a troop contributing country of the UN, because of its stubbornness, has considered the Council complicit in its destabilization, and it in fact associated MONUSCO with this. Whilst this may have borne fruit in the past, the time of manipulation and lies is now over. The lives of civilians deprived of the very means of subsistence for 4 days now in Goma depends on the decisions that you are going to take today. We have not come to tell you about things that you don't know about, but we've come to ask you to be courageous enough to do what is right and to uphold your prerogatives. The lives of civilians cannot be suspended in this machinery that just doesn't respond. We are urging that you take strong actions, recognize the responsibility of Rwanda in the multiple violations of our sovereignty, as well as the atrocities that it's committing. It was not enough for it to stop its ongoing conflict. And now victims are not only from the Congo. Rwanda has struck Africa and Latin America by killing South African, Malawi, Uruguayan servicemen come to protect civilians. It has struck the council by killing the blue helmets of MONUSCO. Surely this is evidence enough. You had a list of speakers from Africa urging you to act on Sunday. On Sunday, it was South Africa, Burundi, Uruguay. Today, we're joined with, there is Burundi, South Africa, but also Lesotho and Malawi. Everybody's responded to this call because it's humanity that's at stake here. Everybody has come to see what you're going to do. What is the degree of humanitarian disaster and flagrant violations of our territory that needs to be achieved for you to condemn the perpetrators in the M23, the Rwandan officers and their accomplices? If this council does not condemn them, this will go down in history as a time of powerlessness and indifference of the Security Council. And immediate action needs to be taken, but we can see a predictable move. Rwanda has deliberately directed this war on the territory of a sovereign state. Our state is starting to state, but what could it expect? Because it's seeing that people are dying elsewhere. But what is it likely to expect? A war knows no borders. War is dirty. It is all-consuming. It takes those who are strong. It takes those who are weak. Over this past 72 hours, we've seen a regional tragedy that could have been prevented if the council had been able to take action. Some people, sir, would like to make believe that inaction is an African solution. We are an African country under attack. This attack is going beyond our borders. It is an attack on multilateralism, on the very principles of the United Nations, against each and every one of us. Allowing this crisis to continue, stating that it's an African problem that requires an African solution, betrays the spirit of international solidarity that was the very bedrock of our organization, and the spirit of a collective security responsibility that justifies your very presence as members of this council. We reiterate our 5 urgent demands. 1, the immediate withdrawal of Rwandan troops and the cessation of hostilities. 2, the establishment of targeted sanctions against the RDF chain of command and the Rwandan political decision makers. 3, the imposition of an embargo on natural resources declared as Rwandan. 4, the withdrawal of Rwanda as a troop contributing country to the UN. One cannot be the aggressor and claim to play a role in promoting peace. 5, total transparency on arms transfers from Rwanda. These transfers must be stopped immediately to prevent them from continuing to fuel violence and instability. Mr. President, we're here because here the world needs to resolve its differences and face its challenges. If the council fails, then it is the street that is going to take charge. And as you know, there's no order, no calmness on the streets. 48 hours ago, before the Security Council, we once again drew your attention to the declaration of war of Rwanda against my country. A shot has been launched into the heart, and the Democratic Republic of Congo is at war, and collective inaction faced with this, unfortunately, is just spilling over into the capital. Indifference is not an option. The Council must not remain passive. The Council must not do this, because each day without a specific concrete response means that silence just becomes louder. The time has come for the Council to demonstrate its courage and its commitment. This chamber needs to be the rampart of justice and human dignity. Thank you very much indeed.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Kaikwamba Wagner for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Rwanda.
Mr. President, thank you for giving me the floor. I would like to once again commend Algeria's able leadership of the Council for the month of January. I'm grateful for your invitation to participate in this important meeting and thank all the member states that spoke before me. I'd like to recognize Ms. Viviane van der Perry, Deputy SRSG. I also recognize Honorable Teresa Kaikwamba Wagner, DRC Minister for Foreign Affairs. I also would like to recognize the participation of the representatives of Angola, Uruguay, Zimbabwe, Burundi, South Africa, Guatemala, and Senegal. Less than 2 days ago, this Council gathered to discuss the ongoing situation in the Eastern DRC. Since then, it has rapidly evolved. On 26 January, the M23/AFC rebel group is reported to have taken over the city of Goma. This triggered retreating forces from DRC coalition to attack and shell the Rwandan territory. Rwanda condemns in the strongest terms these attacks on the town of Rubavu in the northern province, which killed 5 people, innocent Rwandan civilians, and left another 35 injured. This indiscriminate shelling is unacceptable war crime, and further proof of the necessity of maintaining Rwanda's defensive posture put in place precisely to prevent this kind of threat. I would like to recall that these attacks are not the first, but the latest of a long list of provocative actions by the government of the DRC. I'd like to also recall that Rwanda has always shown restraint and sought to engage the DRC in dealing with the root causes of insecurity in the region and along our common border. Rwanda will always stand for peace, as we have the most to lose in the continuation of this conflict. I have always emphasized that Rwanda knows the dividend of peace. We suffered insecurity. Our nation was almost a failed state. So we have worked hard to build peace and to work for peace in the region. So we are strongly committed to peace, peaceful coexistence, and a peaceful region. The coalition of anti-Rwanda forces on our border poses an existential threat to our country, which is not the case for the government of Kinshasa, which feels insulated from whatever happens 2,000 kilometers away. The border of Rwanda is 2,000 kilometers away from Kinshasa. A shell from across in DRC that falls on Rwandan territory falls on a very densely populated villages, and lives are lost. Even one bullet takes a life. Those in Kinshasa will not stay awake when such insecurity happens. So we are very serious when we talk of an existential security threat to Rwanda. Mr. President, the action of this coalition are equally devastating for Congolese. Rwanda is providing humanitarian relief to incoming refugees together with the help of international partners on the ground. A temporary refugee camp has been set up in Rubavu to provide further assistance and shelter to those who are displaced. In addition, many countries have requested our assistance in facilitating the evacuation of their nationals, including European countries of origin of the mercenaries who have been deployed in Eastern DRC. Rwanda also facilitated the transit of MONUSCO and other United Nations personnel through Kigali. Additionally, the hundreds of militia members and FARDC forces we have received have been disarmed and treated with respect and dignity in accordance with international law, and those who are sick are being treated. I would like here also to express Rwanda's condolences to MONUSCO forces that died in this process. On the contrary, we have been dismayed by the reports of attacks and looting of diplomatic missions in Kinshasa, including the Rwandan embassy and several other embassies of members of this council. These thuggish acts, most of which are committed in the passive presence of DRC security forces, are in total violation of international law, especially the 1961 Vienna Convention. Rwanda therefore calls on the DRC to take its diplomatic obligations seriously and hold perpetrators accountable. I'd like to emphasize that those who followed the media, the Rwandan embassy in Kinshasa was among those that was totally burnt down. Mr. President, the deteriorating security situation in the eastern DRC has only one immediate cause: the obsession by the president of the DRC for a military solution and thirst for regime change in Rwanda. We have said over and over to this council. Indeed, this situation could have been solved a long time ago if President Tshisekedi had demonstrated political will and good faith in finding a lasting solution to this conflict. I would like to recall that President Tshisekedi took the unilateral decision to expel the M23 from the political dialogue under the Nairobi process, as well as East African Community Regional Force, which was deployed by EAC. Yet the EAC Regional Force had led to a ceasefire that held for 6 months, which led the M23 to relinquish 80% of the territory it was holding. This was from March 2023 to September 2023. To fill in this vacuum, the DRC instead decided to replace it with a SADC-led force with a more offensive mandate. These two unilateral decisions by President Tshisekedi have caused the Nairobi process to stall, despite numerous attempts to revive it. Mr. President, Council members, as if frustrating the Nairobi process was not enough, the DRC President repeatedly made inflammatory statements against Rwanda. For instance, in December 2022, in a statement addressed to Rwandan youth, he promised to help them, and I quote his exact words, "Get rid of this diabolic regime in Kigali." Those are the President's words. Moreover, in December 2023, during the last campaign, he doubled down saying that he would bomb Kigali without even setting boots on the ground. These are the exact words of the President of DRC against Rwanda, promising to cause regime change. This echoes a similar statement made on 17th November 2024 in Katanga, when he told military and provisional leadership that if he is given the opportunity to revise the constitution, he would use this new term to overthrow the government in Kigali. Those are clear and constant threats that Rwanda will never take lightly. To implement these threats, President Tshisekedi has mobilized a large coalition which includes the FDLR, genocidal militia, European mercenaries, Wazalendo militias, Burundian armed forces, and some DRC. Council members, consequently, Rwanda calls on all foreign forces deployed in the DRC to withdraw from this coalition only aimed at harming Rwanda. I wish to stress that the international community, including some members sitting in this council, have their fair share of the blame in what is happening today in the DRC, at least to condemn even threats of regime change from one member state to another. You also chose to turn a blind eye on these inflammatory statements and the build-up of the aforementioned military coalition, never once condemning the regime change agenda behind them. Mr. President, Council members, Rwanda remains committed to the Rwanda process, given important milestones that were achieved in the process that was led by President Lorenzo and Angola. and one of the milestone, the adoption of a concept of operations, the CONOPS, of the harmonized plan for the neutralization of the FDLR and lifting Rwanda's defensive forces, and a ceasefire that was agreed and was held in from August 2024. The remaining security issues between Rwanda and the DRC was the AFC M23 question. This question was therefore to be addressed. Unfortunately, in the ministerial meeting of 14th December, the DRC categorically refused any commitment of dialogue with the AFC M23. This then prevented a consensus on a draft peace agreement to be signed the following day by heads of state. Therefore, the only solution was to postpone the summit, as Rwanda is not interested in just a photo op. The heads of state were going to Angola for only one agenda item, to sign an agreement that should have been agreed. Mr. President, Rwanda deplored the intensification of hostilities between the Congolese coalition and the AFC/M23 since the breakdown of the summit. More worrying is the intensive shelling by FDLR, FARDC, from densely populated areas, including IDP camps, towards other populated areas held by AFC and M23. In order to bring about peace in Eastern DRC, Rwanda calls on the following. 1. The full implementation of mainly the neutralization of FDLR, which will lead to the lifting of Rwanda's defensive measures. 2. Beyond the CONOPS, Rwanda calls on the withdrawal of foreign troops, part of the Congolese coalition, and we call for European mercenaries to be repatriated and be held accountable. 3. Rwanda believes that MONUSCO can be useful in restoring peace in Eastern DRC by stopping its support to a national army with a regime change mandate, as well as its support to a UN-sanctioned genocidal force and European mercenaries. Rwanda also reiterates its position that it has no hostile intentions against MONUSCO, despite its total failure over the past 26 years. 4. Rwanda believes in the strict adherence to the ceasefire of August 4th, 2024 by all parties, which would allow for a favorable environment for direct dialogue between the DRC and the M23. In this regard, I want to inform you that His Excellency President Kagame spoke with his counterparts from South Africa, His Excellency President Ramaphosa, yesterday. This positive conversation, held in a cordial atmosphere, was productive as it supported the already agreed ceasefire and the resumption of political talks, including with the AFC and M23. I also wish to inform you that tomorrow there will be a virtual ESC summit convened by His Excellency President Ruto on this very question. Before I close, I would like to mention that the DRC government has just claimed that there are Rwandan forces that died in DRC. I want to say that this is categorically not correct. If it was correct, DRC would have provided evidence. I don't think they have that evidence. If they have evidence of any Rwandan soldiers who have died on DRC soil, they should produce that evidence, which I'm sure, I know 100% sure, is not available, because that's not true. In closing, Rwanda is committed to the pursuit of a political solution to the conflict. However, we believe that the Rwanda process must not be personalized or taken as an end in itself, but as a tool to resolve security concerns between Rwanda and the DRC. Both the Rwanda and Nairobi process urgently require new impetus in order to achieve sustainable peace and stability for all the countries in our region. We hope that the recent engagements will work towards that goal. I thank you, Council members.
I thank the representative of Rwanda for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Angola.
His Excellency Ambassador Amar Benjama, President of United Nations Security Council for the month of January, distinguished members of the Security Council, we welcome the presence of Her Excellency Teresa Kayakwamba Wagner, State Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and Francophonie of the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, and Ambassador Ernesto Remusillo, Permanent Representative of the Republic of Rwanda to the United Nations. We thank Mrs. Viviane Van Perre, Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary General for Protection and Operations, for her briefing on the latest developments on the ground and for her bravery in keeping high the UN flag under these difficult circumstances. We deplore today's attacks against diplomatic missions in Kinshasa and call on DRC authorities to ensure their protection under the 1961 Vienna Convention on the Diplomatic Relations. Mr. President, we are at a very critical juncture in the pursuit of lasting peace in the DRC and the normalization of diplomatic relations between the DRC and Rwanda. The M23 has made a significant military advance in North Kivu province, worsening the already fragile security and humanitarian situation in the eastern DRC. It resulted in the capture of the provincial capital, Goma, despite calls by the United Nations Security Council, the African Union, and the other actors in the international community to halt this military advance. This is a make-or-break moment that requires wisdom and pragmatism from the concerned parties and all relevant stakeholders, including the United Nations, the African Union, and sub-regional organizations. Although His Excellency João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço, President of the Republic of Angola, African Union champion for peace and reconciliation, facilitator of the normalization of diplomatic relations between DRC and Rwanda, is making every effort to advance the Luanda process, the security and humanitarian situation in the eastern DRC has suffered a substantial deterioration in the last few weeks. On 24th January 2025, the Angolan head of state expressed deep concern over the serious deterioration of the peace and security situation in the eastern DRC. He condemned and denounced the actions of M23 and its supporters, which undermine the progress made under the Luanda process. He reaffirmed that there is no military solution to the conflict and urged the parties to return immediately to the negotiating table. Due to the rapid deterioration of the situation, members of the enhanced ad hoc verification mechanism and the expanded joint verification mechanism deployed in the city of Goma under the Luanda process to support the pacification process in the eastern DRC on Sunday had to be evacuated to Angola. Mr. President, the UN Security Council is the world's last resort when it comes to maintaining international peace and security. Its mandate is clear and must be respected and upheld. Today, we have one simple and direct message to this Council. The conflict in DRC must cease and the warring parties must return to the negotiating table. The ongoing hostilities in the eastern DRC have already claimed the lives of thousands of civilians and injured many others. Credible reports indicated that Goma has neither running water nor electricity, thus making living conditions of the population and those living in the IDP camps almost unbearable. In addition, millions of people have fled their homes and they don't know where to go. We demand the immediate and unconditional cessation of hostilities, the withdrawal of M23 from the occupied area, as well as the end of its establishment of parallel administration in DRC territory. We call for the full respect of integrity of DRC in accordance with the UN Charter, the international law, and the principles of sovereign equality of all member states. We call on all parties in conflict to fully respect international humanitarian and human rights law, the protection of civilians, IDP camps and medical sites, and the protection of peacekeepers, while noting that attacks on civilians and peacekeepers constitute war crimes. Direct attacks to MONUSCO and some DRC personnel are unacceptable, and those responsible must be held accountable. We urge the signatories of the August 2024 ceasefire agreement to urgently resume dialogue without preconditions. In this context, we call on both parties to return to the Luanda process under the facilitation of His Excellency João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço, President of the Republic of Angola. Mr. President, the hardly-won gains achieved through the Luanda process following months of intense negotiation must be preserved. In his capacity as the African Union champion for peace and reconciliation, mandated to facilitate the mediation between Rwanda and DRC, His Excellency João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço undertook several initiatives to resolve the difference between the two countries and made substantial progress, including the signing of the DRC-Rwanda ceasefire agreement on the 30th July 2024, which entered into force on 4th August 2024. On 15 December 2024, he convened a summit of the presidents of the two countries, which was subsequently postponed due to disagreement regarding how to address the M23 issue. We reiterate our call for a speedy and unconditional disescalation of hostilities and genuine and renewed commitment to peace by both sides. Immediate return to the negotiating table is the only way out, since the conflict and security challenges in the Eastern DRC have no military solution. The parties must continue exploring ways to settle the M23 pending issue to create conditions to reschedule the tripartite summit. We encourage the resumption of contacts between His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, former President of the Republic of Kenya, and the facilitator mandate by the East African Community, with the armed groups in DRC, including the M23, under the Nairobi process, to address sources of grievances that have led to the current level of insecurity in DRC. The United Nations, the African Union, sub-regional organizations, and leaders in the region must work together in a complementary approach to bring DRC and Rwanda back to the Luanda process. To conclude, Mr. President, we continue encouraging all parties to avoid any actions or rhetoric that can further escalate tensions, including provocative language and inflammatory public statements, which are counterproductive to the diplomatic efforts to achieve a lasting solution to this conflict that has prevailed for so long. In his quest to advance the Luanda process, in the last few days, His Excellency João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço, the President of the Republic of Angola, has been in contact with several African leaders. Today, he spoke with His Excellency Mohamed Ould Ghazouani, President of the Republic of Mauritania and current President of the African Union, and His Excellency Teodoro Obiang Nguema Basogo, President of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea and current President of the Economic Community of Central Africa States, to which DRC and Rwanda are members. Angola reiterates the steadfast commitment of His Excellency João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço to continue playing his role as the facilitator mandated by the African Union to assist the normalization of diplomatic relations between DRC and Rwanda to achieve peace and security in the Eastern DRC. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Angola for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Uruguay.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are grateful for the information provided by Ms. Viviane van der Peer, Deputy Special Representative for Protection and Operations in the United Nations Stabilization Mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, MONUSCO. We are also grateful to the President of Algeria for convening this briefing. We underscore the important role played by the Security Council on this issue. Their work has prompted a ceasefire in line with the press statement issued by the Council members on the 26th of January. We fully agree with the content of that press statement. Moreover, we're grateful to Council members for their willingness to address this issue and for their expeditious work. However, unfortunately, the situation on the ground continues to be critical. However, a ceasefire has been announced. However, fighting continues. Consequently, we must continue, as the Council and indeed all of us should continue, to attach the utmost importance to the cessation of hostilities. It is only that that will make it possible to resume negotiations to ultimately achieve a lasting political solution within the framework of the Luanda and Nairobi peace processes. Regarding the M23 offensive, an incredibly critical situation has been produced for civilians in the region. At the same time, the security of MONUSCO personnel has been imperiled. In view of that fact, we value what was said by the Secretary General. He has stated that these attacks may constitute war crimes which must be investigated. Perpetrators must be held accountable. In the face of the aforementioned situation, we condemn it, and we ask you to do the same. The Security Council must take all necessary measures to ensure that the M23 offensive and that waged by those supporting the M23 is ceased, and the Council should act to ensure that there is full cessation of hostilities and full respect for peacekeeping forces. We value the guidelines that the MONUSCO Command has issued to protect the security of civilians and contingents in the peacekeeping forces in the face of the M23 offensive. Without prejudice to the above, we express that there is a need for clear instructions regarding procedures to be followed, and utmost support must be given to national contingents in terms of logistics and supplies so that they're able to address the humanitarian crisis affecting the local population as well as the consequences of the weapons handover by Congolese troops. Medical care for all must be guaranteed. We reiterate our commitment once again to peace in the DRC and our support for MONUSCO at this critical juncture. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Uruguay for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the Southern African Development Community, SADC, allow me to express our gratitude to you for convening this urgent meeting to address the escalating situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo. That we meet again on this issue following the session on Sunday, the 26th of January, underscores the gravity of the unfolding crisis. We welcome the briefing by Deputy Special Representative Vivian van der Peer, and we also recognize the presence of the Foreign Minister of the DRC, Her Excellency Therese Wagner. Mr. President, Zimbabwe, as does SADC, remains unwavering in its adherence to the principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter, particularly the peaceful settlement of disputes and the commitment to respecting the territorial integrity and political independence of states. These principles are more critical than ever as we confront the deepening crisis in the Eastern DRC, particularly in Goma. Mr. President, the chairman of SADC, His Excellency President Emmerson Damson Mnangagwa, issued a statement yesterday in which he conveyed his profound concern over the deteriorating security and humanitarian conditions in the Eastern DRC, brought about by offensive operations of the M23 rebel group and its allies. He condemns unequivocally the cowardly attacks on the UN and SADC peacekeepers, some of whom have paid the ultimate price in the pursuit of peace. On behalf of SADC, President Mnangagwa extended heartfelt condolences to the families of the fallen peacekeepers and wished them, those injured, a speedy and full recovery. Mr. President, the persistent instability in the Eastern DRC, exacerbated by the actions of the M23 rebel group, represents a grave threat to peace and security in the region. The occupation of Goma and other areas by armed groups undermines the sovereignty of the DRC and the stability of the Great Lakes region as a whole. We commend all efforts deployed at the local, regional, and international levels in addressing this crisis. However, we stress that sustainable peace can only be achieved through dialogue, strengthened governance, and robust international support. To this end, we urge the United Nations and the Security Council to, 1, provide enhanced support for the protection of civilians and the stabilization of conflict-affected areas. 2, ensure accountability for violations of international humanitarian law and human rights, including the attacks on peacekeepers and civilians. 3, address the root causes of the conflict, including the illicit exploitation of natural resources, which continues to fuel instability. 4, facilitate the movement of humanitarian assistance. Mr. President, as SADC chair, Zimbabwe reaffirms its commitment to collaborating with the African Union, the United Nations, and all stakeholders to achieve lasting peace in the DRC. The current crisis highlights the urgent need to reform the international peace and security architecture, including the United Nations Security Council, to better respond to the unique challenges facing Africa. Moreover, we reiterate the importance of eliminating the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons, which perpetuates instability across the continent. Mr. President, in conclusion, SADC stands in full solidarity with the people and government of the Democratic Republic of Congo. We call on all stakeholders to act decisively to prevent further escalation, safeguard lives, and restore peace and stability. This is a moment for collective action, a moment to demonstrate our shared commitment to unity, peace, and sustainable development. Zimbabwe and SADC stand ready to contribute meaningfully to these efforts, and we look forward to working with our partners to forge a peaceful and prosperous future for the DRC, the SADC region, and beyond. To that end, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe and current chairperson of SADC has called for an extraordinary summit scheduled for the 30th of January 2025 to discuss this matter. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Zimbabwe for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Burundi.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, my delegation is delighted to participate again in this briefing on the worsening security situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The situation is characterized by recent developments in the city of Goma. We thank the Algerian presidency of the Council for having convened this meeting at such short notice. I welcome Her Excellency, the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the DRC, Her Excellency Thérèse Kaikwamba-Wagner, and I hail the briefing delivered by Ms. Viviane van der Peer, Deputy Special Representative for Protection and Operations in MONUSCO. At the outset, I wish, as the government of Burundi, to convey our condolences to the loved ones of those that have lost their lives over the last 48 hours in the DRC. Mr. President, for the second time in 48 hours, we are gathered to note with bitter regret that the situation in eastern DRC has worsened to an alarming degree. The time has come for words to give way to tangible action. As we stated 2 days ago, Burundi staunchly supports the principle of the peaceful coexistence of nations, and we categorically reject proxy wars. Mr. President, over almost 3 decades, Eastern DRC has become the theatre of untenable massacres, a theatre of armed conflicts, exceptional in their violence. These conflicts have been fueled by foreign interests and undermine peace efforts as well as fanning the flames of local tensions. Every day, grave violations of human rights are noted, and the number of victims now stands in the millions. Recent developments in Goma bear witness to a potential regional conflagration. If no tangible action is taken today to condemn those responsible and thwart their plans, we risk becoming the witnesses of a disaster, and history will hold us directly accountable. To date, Burundi has commended bilateral agreements reached with DRC in terms of military cooperation to ensure the security of our common borders. Allow me just to issue an aside at this juncture. Burundi is not part of any coalition. Mr. President, for years now, the United Nations, through the invaluable work of the DRC group of experts, has rigorously documented the dynamics of this conflict. Myriad reports have been presented before this chamber, emphasizing the involvement of external actors known to support local armed groups. We've had reports of flagrant violations of human rights and the systematic pillaging of DRC's natural resources. How many more reports do we need to hear before the international community, and in particular the Security Council, shoulders its responsibilities? 48 hours ago, during our address, we asked ourselves questions about the deafening silence of the Security Council at a time when thousands of lives are being tragically lost every day. Where is the international community? Where is the Security Council, which is so ready to act in other conflicts? Should we interpret this silence as bias? As Martin Luther King Jr. once said, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Let us not be those silent friends. Let us stand on the side of the United Nations Charter to save the order established in San Francisco in June 1945. Mr. President, this conflict has raged on for decades, and yet no resolution has condemned Rwanda as the perpetrator of the flagrant violations of the principles of national sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC. Rwanda doesn't even deny its presence on the ground, nor its support for the M23. That has been emphasized by more than 3/4 of the council members during the last meeting held. The territorial integrity of the DRC cannot be imperiled. Armed incursions, the pillaging of its natural resources, and repeated border violations must immediately stop. Given the security and humanitarian situation, Burundi will always champion full respect for international law and IHL. With that in mind, Burundi condemns flagrant violations of international law and international humanitarian law. We call for an immediate cessation of hostilities in eastern DRC and for us to ensure that this territory does not become an arena for indirect confrontation between regional and international stakeholders. We support efforts made within the Luanda and Nairobi processes by demanding that all parties uphold commitments made. We demand the withdrawal of Rwandan forces from the DRC, and we reiterate our commitment to the sovereignty of the DRC being upheld, as well as our commitment to its territorial integrity, its political independence, and its right to defend itself against any external act of aggression. We recommend that support continue to be provided to civilians and those displaced by this war in order to ensure that we meet their basic needs. Particular care must be given to women and children. To conclude, as we have already stated, the Security Council must pay heed to the legitimate demands of the government and people of the DRC. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Burundi for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of South Africa.
Mr. President, thank you for convening a second meeting within just a few days of the current tenuous situation in the Eastern DRC. The situation on the ground remains dangerously fluid, as M23 continues its offensive campaign in North and South Kivu. We thank the Deputy Special Representative, Ms. Viviane van der Peer, for her briefing. And again, we wish to recognize the presence of Minister Therese Kayikwamba-Wagner in the chamber. Since the last meeting of the Council on the situation in the Eastern DRC, 4 additional South African peacekeepers lost their lives in the continuing conflict in Goma. On 27th January 2025, M23 launched several mortar bombs aimed at Goma Airport, which landed in the base of the South African troops, killing 3 soldiers and injuring some troops. A 4th soldier, as Minister said earlier, succumbed to his injuries sustained during the weekend attacks. This illustrates that the M23 is well-resourced and would have acquired such resources through means that are against the sanctions imposed by this Council. It is a contradiction in terms that a major UN peacekeeping troop contributing country could provide resources to an illegal armed group that is conducting offensives against peacekeepers, civilians, and key infrastructure, thereby undermining the mandate of this Council. That must be addressed with utmost urgency. As we stated at the last meeting of the Council a few days ago, the future of UN peacekeeping and its credibility is at stake if we are to tolerate such violations without any ramifications. The Security Council must speak with one voice and act in unison to stop the carnage unfolding in the Eastern DRC. Unfortunately, a press statement of the Security Council, while sending an important political message, has proven to be insufficient in the current situation. Consequently, South Africa would like to highlight the following issues. Firstly, the UN needs to, as a matter of urgency, provide additional support to MONUSCO in order to reinforce operational positions. This is to ensure that MONUSCO can fulfill its primary mandate to protect civilians. This support will also assist to ensure that no further peacekeepers' lives are lost. Similarly, a stronger consideration must be made to bolster the support that MONUSCO provides to the South African Development Community mission in the DRC, SAMI DRC. Both missions, have the primary responsibility of protecting civilians and key civilian infrastructure. They are instrumental as long as armed groups remain active in the Eastern DRC. Secondly, we remain concerned about the worsening humanitarian situation with millions of people in need of humanitarian assistance. There is a need to ensure that appropriate conditions are created for humanitarian aid to reach people in need across Eastern DRC. All parties to the conflict must uphold international humanitarian law and human rights law. Thirdly, we reiterate our call for the resumption of negotiations under the Luanda process. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa held a telephone call with President Kagame of Rwanda yesterday to discuss recent developments in the Eastern DRC and that escalation in fighting that has resulted in the deaths of many peacekeepers, including South Africans. The two heads of states agreed on the urgent need for a ceasefire and the resumption of the talks by all parties to the conflict. Accordingly, South Africa recognizes the significant strides made by President João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço of Angola in facilitating peaceful resolution of the tensions between the DRC and Rwanda. We urge parties to recommit to these talks and address all outstanding issues amicably to allow the region to return to peace and the restoration of the political rapprochement and good neighborliness. This includes both sides addressing their relations with illegal armed groups and the withdrawal of the Rwanda Defense Forces from the DRC. We thus look forward to the much-anticipated East African Community Extraordinary Summit likely to take place in the coming days, with the participation of both President Tshisekedi and President Kagame. Lastly, the Council needs to underline the importance of preventative measures to avoid the recurrence of the cyclical conflict in the Eastern DRC. It is well known that the genesis of this conflict is primarily the illegal exploitation of the Congolese natural resources. International and regional efforts, including those initiated by the International Conference on the Great Lakes region to address the problem of the resource curse in the region, must be operationalized and supported. As I conclude, Mr. President, I wish to remind Council members that South Africa has suffered many casualties in this conflict. The reason we never hesitate in supporting peace efforts, even at excessive cost, is because we are a product of international solidarity at whose center was the United Nations. Therefore, the ultimate sacrifice of South African peacekeepers in the promoting peace and security in the Great Lakes region should not be in vain. Our plea is for this Council to always protect those who value, safeguard, and execute the mandates adopted in this chamber, and also hold into account those who violate the decisions of this very Council. Failure to do so can only undermine the credibility of and delegitimize the authority of this Council and the United Nations as a whole. We trust that all members of this Council and the international community can support measures towards establishing a ceasefire, encouraging dialogue, and promoting efforts towards peace and stability in the whole country and the Eastern DRC in particular. Thank you.
I thank the representative of South Africa for this statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Guatemala.
Señor Presidente del
Mr. President of the Security Council, members of the Council, Minister for Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and Francophonie of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Therese Kaikwamba Wagner. Given the urgent nature of the situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the way it is playing out, we're grateful for the convening of the urgent meeting held on the 26th of January, and once again for the meeting convened today. We're also grateful for the information furnished by Ms. Viviane van der Peer, Deputy Special Representative for Protection and Operations in MONUSCO. And we're grateful for efforts made to keep troop contributing countries abreast of developments in a timely fashion. Mr. President, the government of Guatemala wishes to express its grave concern at the ratcheting up of hostilities in eastern DRC. We condemn in the strongest terms the offensive launched by M23 in recent weeks, as well as their expansion into North Kivu and the taking of Goma. This situation is having a devastating impact on the civilian population. To date, it has prompted the displacement of at least 3 million people in North Kivu alone. As a troop-contributing country, Guatemala reiterates its tireless support for peace efforts underway for Luanda and Nairobi processes, both designed to abate tensions in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We deplore the deaths of blue helmets from various countries, including Uruguay, South Africa, and Malawi, and we wish a speedy recovery to those wounded, including 2 Guatemalan officials. We reaffirm our support for MONUSCO's mandate, that is, to protect civilians, and we condemn in the strongest terms the actions of armed groups that are imperiling the security of UN blue helmets and civilian personnel. Their protection and immediate security must be guaranteed, as must the provision of supplies necessary for the mission's mandate to be discharged. Guatemala wishes to state that attacks against UN blue helmets may constitute war crimes pursuant to international law. In particular, bearing in mind that the primary mission of our national troops is to protect civilians in the face of imminent danger of physical violence. That mandate is discharged both effectively and impartially. We hope that the Security Council will take unequivocal action as a matter of urgency. This action must be categorical in terms of condemning attacks against blue helmets that are increasingly at risk. Mr. President, we urge all stakeholders to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and to put an end to all forms of support being extended to armed groups, be these Congolese or foreign. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Guatemala for this statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Senegal.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, Senegal would like to thank Algeria for convening this important meeting and commend the briefing of Ms. Viviane van der Peer. My delegation also would like to welcome Her Excellency Thérèse Wagner, Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of the DRC. From the outset, my delegation pays tribute to all those blue helmets and soldiers who've died in the line of duty. Senegal would like to present its most sincere condolences to South Africa, Malawi, and Uruguay in particular. We stand in solidarity with the people of the DRC and all UN staff on the ground to continue to lend assistance and comfort to people in need and, in many ways, at risk of their lives. My delegation would like to extend its thoughts and prayers for civilians and would like to wish a speedy recovery for those injured. My delegation would like to reiterate its commitment to accountability for all crimes committed against UN staff as stipulated in Resolution 2589 of 2021. Mr. President, as you can imagine, Senegal, with its 459 sons and daughters in MONUSCO, is seriously concerned by the situation regarding the blue helmets on the ground. In Congo, indeed in August 1960, just 4 months after it acceded to its independence, Senegal engaged in the UN operation in Congo, so my country has remained actively engaged in UN efforts to bring peace to the region. In these difficult times, we would reiterate to all parties the obligations incumbent upon them to protect civilians, in particular women and children, and peacekeepers and humanitarian staff, and also to reiterate the necessary respect for human rights. Like the previous speakers, Senegal condemns in the strongest possible terms the resumption of fighting in North Kivu and in particular in Goma in flagrant violation of the ceasefire concluded on the 30th of July 2024. The uptick in clashes constitutes a serious attack on the security of the region and of the continent. We cannot allow the situation to deteriorate into a global crisis that will have an impact on hundreds of thousands of civilian lives and in a region that has already been so sorely tested. This is why my delegation joins itself with the call of the A3+ of the Security Council, as well as that of the Secretary General, calling for the immediate cessation of the M23 offensive and its territorial expansion. The only option to this conflict is political in nature. Senegal would urge, therefore, all the parties to honour their commitments as the part of the ceasefire and to give diplomatic negotiations a chance under the auspices of the African and in good faith to strive for peace and regional stability. My country, therefore, reiterates its unfailing support for the African mediation efforts between the DRC and Rwanda that are currently being undertaken as part of the Luanda process. Senegal also calls for ongoing consultations as part of the Nairobi process to settle the ongoing issue of armed groups, including the M23, and to pave the way to bring peace and stability to the region. Mr. President, my delegation does not wish to conclude without calling upon the Council to learn the correct lessons from this conflict and the impact that's having on MONUSCO. What we learn is that there have been many difficulties encountered, but the staff have been very resilient in accomplishing their mission. It is important for the Council to provide this mission with necessary resources to carry out its tasks, to contribute to the protection of civilians in the area where it's deployed, and to support stabilization of institutions in the DRC and the main reforms in the area of governance and security. This necessarily involves the guarantee of an environment propitious for its deployment, the involvement of all stakeholders, and better coordination with regional forces present in the DRC in terms of taking charge of the threat posed by armed groups. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Senegal for the statement. Her Excellency Ms. Thérèse Kaikwamba Wagner, State Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and Francophonie of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give her the floor.
Mr. President, thank you for the floor. Members of the Council, first of all, I would like to note that for the first time in our meetings, Rwanda did extend condolences for the fallen peacekeepers. However, I would like to rectify something. The peacekeepers did not die in a process. The peacekeepers were killed. Second of all, SADC forces deployment through SAMI DRC were not deployed unilaterally by the DRC, but rather with a mandate from the AU, an organization Rwanda is a part of, even if its behavior in the DRC clearly flaunts its principles. Third, the M23 excluded itself from the Nairobi process by renewing attacks against the FARDC. The government of the DRC has nonetheless expressed its willingness to re-include the M23 in the Nairobi process. We reject Rwanda's obsession and attempts to elevate the M23 to the level of an interlocutor deemed fit to sit at the same table as a legitimate government. 30 years down the line, we have never stooped to the level of expecting and demanding from Rwanda to talk to its brothers and sisters, the FDLR, who are still in our country. We have not stooped to that level. Fourth, on regime change, we will remind the Rwandan delegation that the M23 and the AFC has repeatedly expressed its intent to march in Kinshasa. The very M23 Rwanda forces are backing right now. there is a subtlety that should not go amiss between words and actions. Rwanda's actions, side by side with the M23, are actions seeking to overthrow a legitimately established government. On the Luanda and Nairobi processes, we will remind the Rwandan representative that the DRC never left the negotiating table. It was Rwanda that did not show up on the 15th. It was Rwanda that did not come when President Lorenzo invited us. And President Kenyatta was also present. President Tshisekedi honored his commitment. In the past weeks, we have seen efforts, calls from this council, from our partners, from our friends, urging us all to renew our efforts within the Luanda process. The DRC never left the table. It is up to Rwanda to come back to the table. I would also like to remind the Council that in this very session, the government of the DRC, through my own statement, condemned all attacks against diplomatic missions in the DRC. We do this in our concern to abide by and respect international law. However, we have yet to hear Rwanda explain to us what its efforts have been to abide by international law and to respond to the violations it has been found guilty of in the DRC. Violations of the Charter, violations of international humanitarian law, violations of international human rights law. Members of the Council, I would like to close with what has brought us back here in less than 48 hours. Rwanda's outright contempt for this Council and its declaration that it will not, for the Council and the Council's declaration, and its demonstration that it is in the deluded belief that there is a Rwandan exception when it comes to international law. But what has also brought us here is the Council's choice 2 days ago to opt for words and not for actions. This Council is not unable to take actions. In fact, it is uniquely equipped to take actions. Hence, the question that remains at the end of this meeting is whether this Council is unwilling to act. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Kayikwamba Wagner for her statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
Wow, wow, wow. Wow, wow, wow. Mwabibonye njye nkunze cyane iriya closing ya Madame Kayikwamba aho yavugaga obviously mu Cyongereza. Hari abantu benshi bavuze ibitandukanye, cyane cyane abahagarariye ibihugu bya donc abahagarariye South Africa, abahagarariye reka nze ngere kuri iyo list, abantu bahagarariye South Africa, Pakistan, very interesting. We yagiye kure aravuga ati impamvu y'intambara ni amabuye, ntaho bihuriye n'ibyo Kagame yirirwa avuga. We ntiyavuze izina rya Kagame, ariko yavuze ati impamvu y'aya mabuye. Reka mvuge gatoya cyane, nyuremo nihuta kuri bimwe yagarutseho. Reka mpere kuri Sierra Leone. bose reka ne kuvuga Sierra Leone gusa kuri iki kibazo cya embassies za amambasade yo muri Congo y'abanyamahanga muri Congo. Yavuze bose babyamaganye birumvikana, ariko urabona ko byazanye ikintu cya distraction kucyongeramo, ariko ntabwo ari cyabateranyije, ariko kubera ko byabaye uyu munsi singaya n'abavuga ko ari aba infiltré b'u Rwanda, kuko ubona ko ari nk'ibintu byakoze kugira gusa ngo bashyiremo ibi, nabyo ntabwo nabihakana. Ayo mabandi hooligans yenda bariya bajya bafatanye bari kumwe na bariya barwanya ubutegetsi bwa Perezida Tshisekedi, Kigali ntabwo byantangaza iramutse ibikoze. Sierra Leone rero ndetse n'abandi bose bagiye babigarukaho. Ubwongereza bwatwibiyemo akabanga. Ubwongereza bwavuze ko bwavuganye na foreign secretary wabo, umubanyi n'amahanga wabo, yavuganye n'u Rwanda kandi kuri high level. Hashobora kuba hari something ibyo yenda tutaramenya, ariko bigaragara ko hari ikiganiro kitari kimeze neza, kuko mu kiganiro cyacu cyangwa se ndamutse reka ndangize iyi segment ya nyuma, yenda turebe ko twabona iriya press conference ya Madame Therese Kayikwamba Wagner nyuma y'iyi nama. Tutayibonye twayishyiraho hanyuma. Noneho ku Uburusiya nabwo bwagarutse ku bintu bya illegal, amabuye y'agaciro atanyuze mu mucyo, na blood minerals cyangwa se blood ariya maminere ava mu maraso. Iyo ni u Rwanda nyine nibyo bavugaga, kubera ko biriya bya Rubaya n'ahandi bagomba gucreya conflict, bagomba gushyiraho akajagari kugira ngo bakomeze basahure bitwaje ko hari conflict ahantu. Etazini nawe yagarutse kuri ya embassies, of course bose babivuze bati Kongo igomba gufata obligations zo guproteger les ambassades, ariko ku bya ambasade ko numvise Rwamucyo avuga ngo ambasade yabayitwitse kugera hasi, kandi koko bayitwitse yose, ariko bavuga ko bayikodeshaga. Sinzi umuntu yambwira ko bayikodesha badafite y'inzu, so cyangwa bari barayiguze. Rega hari mwene wabo witwa Ndoba wari uriyo mu bintu by'ubucuruzi, ashobora kubasanga bari baranayiguze, ariko simbizi. Bavuga ku by'aba UN peacekeepers. Amerika mbashaka kumva kuyitaho cyane, uretse no kuba nyibamo, ariko no kumva kubera influence ifite ku isi. Ariko uyo yavuze akantu kagaragaza, yavuze ati ntabwo tugomba guta icyizere, ati iherezo ry'iyi ntambara turaribona, atariko tugomba gufata icyemezo now. Mwiyumviye, ntabwo ari gende ho mbivuga. Ati this body, iyi Security Council niduta icyizere, kurangira kw'iyi ntambara kurimo kuragara. Yavuze ko biri muri in our sight, ariko we must act now. Noneho rero ku bijyanye n'ibishobora gukorwa, yavuze ko Amerika iri bukoreshe ububasha cyangwa se ibyo ifite mu bushobozi bwayo kugira ngo igire uruhare rwayo, ariko iranavuga ko nabo bagomba gukoresha tools bafite zose. Njyewe ntabwo mfite gushidikanya ko ibi bijyanye n'iby'abandi bose bagiye bavuga. Ubufaransa, ni gute Ubufaransa butagaragara aha ngaha? Ubufaransa yes, nabwo bwagarutse ku Rwanda. Ushobora kuba comments zayo sinzi ahantu ziri, ariko nabo bagarutse kuri u Rwanda baruvuga mu mazina, yes bagenda bavuga ibintu byabo bya FDLR n'ibindi byose babizamo, ariko ntabwo bagerageza kubikwetinga, ntabwo bashaka kubiringanyiza ntabwo bajya babiringanyiza n'uruhare rw'u Rwanda. Ndakomeza kuri Denmark. Okay, Denmark ntabwo nanditseho byinshi, nta kintu nagikozeho, komateri kidasanzwe. Republic of Korea. Repubulika ya Korea yavuze ko u Rwanda twari ahangaha ku cyumweru, ariko u Rwanda rwirengagije ibyo u Rwanda rwirengagije ibyo twavuze. Munyihanganire gatoya. What's up? Ndakumva. None kumpamagara ndi mu kiganiro kandi uri mu cyumba. Hari ikihutirwa ushaka kuza mu kiganiro? Yewe ugitangira, ushobora kugitanga, naguha Zoom. Okay. Murambabarira gatoya kubera situation tuba turi iriya ya Kongo, akenshi amatelefone nyine nkomeza kuyakoresha nkayitaba. Ndagira ngo kuri no twaravuga twaraha ku cyumweru, ariko ibyabaye bisa naho u Rwanda nta cyabaye, ko yavuze ati u Rwanda rwirengagije ibyo twarusabye. U Rwanda rwirengagije ibyo twarusabye. Chine nayo yasabye ko bagaruka kuri negotiating table, ku meza y'ibiganiro. Kenya ndetse na Pakistan. Ikibazo cyambabaje, mu Bushinwa bavuzemo na Kenya. Ko bajya muri Kenya. Kenya izamo gute? Bavuze ko bashimiye imyitwarire, donc ibyo ngo Perezida Ruto yavuze. Mureke mpagarara ahangaha mbanze mvuge ku bya Ruto. Kwanza abatekereza ko Ruto ari mu maguye bafite ukuri. Niyo mpamvu iyi ntambara izarangira mu buryo bumwe gusa. Izarangira ari uko habaye intambara, kuko bigaragara Kagame nta kindi kintu ashaka. Ikindi cya kabiri nuko izi nama za buri gihe zo hirya no hino, zivuye muri Kenya, muri Rwanda, ngizo muri SADC, ngizo aho bashaka hose ko bajya guhurira ngaho muri Qatar, Turkiya, iriya ni imitwe y'abari inyuma y'intambara bashaka itarangira. Baravuga bati okay, mwe muretse dufite ibindi biganiro hariya, mwe muretse dufite ibindi biganiro hariya, ariko bapanga ibindi migambi mibisha kuri Kongo no kuri President Tshisekedi. Iyo wumvise President William Samoei Ruto araje mwijoro, agiye hariya pari animated nk'umuntu umaze gukurura fege, ati tugomba to my people, navuganye na my brother, ati kandi bose bemeye kuza, ntagire yarangiza akarangiza atavuze n'ijambo na rimwe ku muntu wateye urimo wica abanyekongo, akavuga ngo conflicts zigomba kurangira. Ibyo nibyo gukereza, nibyo kugenda bidindiza President Tshisekedi. Noneho nihagira umuntu ubona iriya press conference, nyabuna muyinyoherereze byihuta, mumbwira aho nyikura, nyimite nyibasangiza nayo, aho ari buze gufata ibibazo n'ibisubizo. Ndeka ndaza kuguma nyicunga nanjye, ariko ndeka ndangize iyi observation z'aba bantu bakoze kuri iki kiganiro. Gusa Kenya ati arangije atweeting ibintu bivuga ngo navuganye na Emmanuel Macron, perezida w'Ubufaransa, ngo ku kibazo cya ngo ku kibazo cya mumbabarire, urakoze. Ati navuganye na Perezida Macron ku kibazo cya Congo, ngo cya Eastern Congo. Why Kenya nka Ruto wa EAC ajya kuvugana na Perezida wa France ku kibazo cya Congo? Warangiza ukabivuga. Number one, muri Kenya hari undi mugabo udiringa na kiriya kibazo cyo muri Congo, uwo ni Perezida Uhuru Kenyatta, kandi we yizewe ni umuhuza utabogamye nubwo ari umunyakenya. Ruto arabogamye, twese turabizi, buri muntu wese arabizi. Ntabwo numva impamvu we yakongera kubyinjiramo kandi azi ko hari mugenzi we ubirimo. Urabona bya bindi byo gushaka gukomeza kuvuga ngo barakomeza kuvuga uhuru burashobora kuba adasinzira nawe agafite karakteri zimeze ukuntu, akavuga ati reka mbivane kuri uhuru mbizane iwanjye, noneho ntiwongere kuvuga ngo uhuru. So, avuze ko ngo ahamagaye abaperezida bombi, arangije ahamagara perezida w'Ubufaransa. What is that? Bamututse, ariko bamuhamije abanyakenya, bamuhaye ibyo mu by'ukuri bamuhaye bamuhambirije. Ni muri nabonye umuntu wabipostinze witwa niba ari Kenyan Gossips, ubona ari ibintu mu by'ukuri biri bavuga ko perezida wabo ari bantu bamwihaye ku rubuga ko ari umuntu mbese utabahesha icyubahiro, kubera ko kubona avuga ati ngiye guhamagara, bamubaje bati se ko ari ibibazo bya Congo uhamagara amakuru gute? Noneho wanakwibaza, ese ubundi, by the way, reka twemere ko bashobora kujya guhamagara, iwe yavuga ati mpamagaye inama nk'umukuru wa East African Community, right? Noneho murebe amagambo bamuvuzeho, reka nyasharinge. Aravuga ati bavuze bati the whole of Africa as united in bashing President William Ruto after his call with Macron about the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. Bavuga ukuntu bamuhaye urw'amenyo Afrika yose, ngo yamuhaye urw'amenyo ngo amaze kuvuga ko yavuganye na Macron ku kibazo cya Congo. Bamututse, bamubaza bati ni iki gituma uvugana na perezida w'Abafaransa ku kibazo cya Congo kandi ku bibazo bya Afurika? Bagashyiraho bya bindi yavuze ati navuganye na perezida Emmanuel Macron ku kibazo cya situation muri Eastern Congo. Why? Nanjye simbyumva. Uramutse muvuganye ntabwo ujya ntabwo ni muri yenda cyane uburyo buri informel ko nta mandate ufite yabyo. Eastern yamuhamagaye of course, kubera ko amubwira ati wowe uri perezida wa East Africa, birumvikana, ariko ni East Africa yakoze, yigeze yamagana u Rwanda na rimwe, yigeze ivuga ikira kibazo, yigeze icyitaho? No. So bamuvuze barinigura koko. Ahangaha berekanaga ko ni ambasade yo muri Kenya nayo bayitwitse. Ntabwo nshaka kujya muri ibi ngibi cyane, kubera ko nagira ngo mbereke gusa ko ni byinshi cyane bamwihaye pe kuri iyi dosiye. Baramubwira ati uri papeti, uri icyo ntazi, bamubwiye ibintu byinshi cyane. Reka rero nkomeze nanjye ahangaha kuri ibona mbabwiye ibya China. Ubwo China yari ivuze ngo kuko yavuze ko irimo iganira nako ngo bashyigikiye ibiganiro byo muri Kenya, kandi biriya bintu byo muri Kenya murumva hari ibya Angola se barayiretse? Mumbabarire mumbwire, Angola barayiretse? So hari iyo approach ya Angola ariyo yahawe amahirwe. Hari n'iyo ya Uhuru Kenyatta. Biriya bya Kenya bya Ruto bagiye bagarura muri Security Council, yewe byandyaga ahantu. Pakistan, mu bantu banejeje cyane, Pakistan yarangije ivuga ngo muri Congo to dealing n'ikibazo cya illegal minerals, buriya bucuruzi bw'amabuye atemewe, bati kuko niyo root cause, niho intandaro ya sekibi yose, niho hava impamvu, niyo mizi y'izi ngorane zose. urumva ko bamufatiye ibihano nabyo byaba ari byiza cyane. Noneho kuri iyo point haza Madame Therese Kayikwamba Wagner aravuga ati donc nashimye, ntabwo ndi bujye kuri ibi ya nyuma, yo iriya yavuze nyuma niyo iri, ibindi byose ni yatanze shema, babwira ikibazo, bavuga uruhare rw'u Rwanda nk'uko bisanzwe, ariko ageze mbere y'uko ajya muri substance, mbere y'uko avuga icyamuzinduye, yababwiye ati n'abasirikare ba RDF bapfira muri Congo bapfira ubusa, banyarwanda mutega amatwi ibi bintu. Ati n'abasirikare bariya bica kandi bica abanyekongo, ariko aravuga ati nabo ndabatekereza, bagwa ku butaka bwa Kongo bapfira ubusa, ariko cyane kuruta aravuga ati ababyeyi babo badashobora kuririra abana babo. Wow, ati ababyeyi babo, nk'umubyeyi avuga ati ababyeyi rwose b'abana b'abanyarwanda bapfira ishyanga ku busa, badashobora no kubona n'imirambo y'abana babo, badashobora no kurira abana babo. Abari ubavuga abanyamahanga barimo baravuga ati aba bana b'abanyarwanda barababaye, abantu badashobora gukora n'ikiriyo, ariko bakaba baguye mu butaka muri hakurya muri Kongo. Abanyamahanga bashobora kuba aribo masasu yari yabishe, bakumva bati puwa banyarwanda muzize ubusa. Iki kintu cyankoze ku mutima cyane, cyankoze ku mutima kubera ko ibi byagombye kuba bivugwa n'abandi b'abasaje bari mu Rwanda, ariko hariya nta n'umwe ukopfora, nta n'umwe uzigira yumva ijambo n'iri rimwe gusa. U Rwanda rero narwo ruhawe urubuga, bahita bakora ikintu cyo kunangira, baranangira pe, ndetse baravuga bati nta n'umusirikare wacu waguye muri Kongo n'umwe. Number one, mu Rwamucyo hariya UN ari umugani wa Kagame yirirwa muri McDonald's, ntabwo ashobora kumenya iya ntambara, arabizi neza ko n'abasirikare ba RDF badashobora kumubwira, ariko diplomatique arumva nyine represent igihugu cye kivuga ko nta bantu gipfusha muri Congo. Yes, ati nta n'umusirikare natwe n'umwe, ariko ati yaba ufite ibimenyetso wamutwereka, basanga nayo bishaka, keretse nanjye nabimwereka mbishatse nabimwereka, birahari byinshi cyane, mfite amafoto y'abantu benshi bapfuye hagati, cyane cyane muri intambara ya Goma, bose bagiye bapfa le 24, le 25, le 26, guhera kuri 24 niho bapfaga benshi cyane. Amafoto arahari, ntabwo ari muri social media. None se ruriya rubyiruko bari abasore bangana kuri imyaka 20 hafi ya bose, Rwamucyo amateka ko azabikubaza, uhakanye muri ONI ku mugaragaro, uhakanye ababyeyi b'abanyarwanda bakumva, ute nta munyarwanda upfira hariya muri Kongo. You serious? Banyarwanda murumva ukuntu twagurishijwe na Kagame n'ayo mabandiye n'agatsiko cye k'ibifobagane. Mutekereze kubona uhagarariye u Rwanda ntavuga ati yenda ibyo ntacyo mvuga da, kuko ushobora no kuvuga ibindi ibyo ntubivuge, ariko ukahagarara. Umubyeyi ubu ngubu ari ku kiriyo, uyu munsi muri iri joro, benshi abandi bamaze kubabwira bati ejo muze mushyingure, muze mufate no ku musaraba gusa, dore ko n'abantu batazi. Erega mubona byandi babita ngo M23 ngo izifata amayiti zabo, ugatekereza ko ari M23 n'aba special forces b'u Rwanda. Benshi bari bavuze ko ikigo narababwiye ahangaha ko ikigo cya Kabigogwe cyari cyabaye empty, cyasigamo abantu nka 50 ngo bakirinze, bose baje gufata Goma. Tekereza umubyeyi uri mu Rwanda, uretse ko aya makuru nk'ayo badashobora kuyatanga. ngo bababwire bati nta muntu upfira hariya. Ya, avuga ati amaraso y'umwana wanjye ariwe n'imbwa, arigaswe n'imbwa. N'igihugu cyo yagiye kurwanira ariko bamubeshye kiramwihakanye. Aragenda avuga ya magambo Kagame asunze gusubiramo ati ati Europe twege nyine ducunga umutekano cyane, ndetse n'Uburayi bwadusabye ko twabafasha gucunga umutekano ahandi. Angola yavuze neza cyane, ubona ko harimo uburakari bitandukanye nuko bavuze ubushize, bati UN mandate bagomba kuyubahiriza kandi nibo bahaye MONUSCO mandate yo gukora akazi kabo, none barimo baricwa. So n'ibindi byose no kuvuga gukora UN Security Council akazi kayo ikitumye iriho, none babaye nk'abakutse amenyo, baravuga ati bikwiriye kubahirizwa. Burundi na bakunze, murazi ko Burundi ushize nta kintu navuze ku Burundi, soko batavuze neza, ariko ntabwo byari bitomoye nk'ibyo twumvise uyu munsi. Burundi baravuze bati baravuze bati disaster, akaga kagiye kuba mu karere. Uragira ko atabizi? Do you think hagiye kuba akaga mu karere keretse mufite icyo mukoze? Niba mudafite icyo mukoze, hagiye kuba akaga mu karere. Anaranavuga ati intambara ya region y'akarere irimo iragaragara, iraboneka, keretse mufite icyo mukora. Ibyo yavuze ni byinshi, ariko ibyo kandi yabivuze agira gutya, kandi arabizi, kandi nzi impamvu yabyo, ngewe nzi impamvu yabyo, ko Kagame nawe ari muri iyo mitwe nk'iyo ngiyo. Murabyirengagiza, ariko hari ibyo mutazirengagiza. Intambara y'akarere irabaho. Hari n'ikintu abantu bajya batekereza ko Kagame ngo keretse nk'ibikoresho arimo yiba muri Kongo, kandi nabyo nigeze kumva babivuga, ureba MONUSCO ukabivuga. Ni Ketara, merci. Urumva numvise babigarukaho, ariko reka nze babwire kuri ibi by'iyi nama ya Security Council, ntabwo turamenya icyo bagiye kuvuga, ariko Burundi bubaye clair, barabwiye ati regional war iri mu nzira, ndetse mudashobora kuyirengagizayo. Ibya Senegal ntabyo nza kuvuga. Therese aragaruka avuga ukuntu u Rwanda rwo rwumva ko amategeko atabureba, ibivugwa ahandi hose bireba abandi, ariko bo ntabwo bibareba. Wow, that's great. Ariko nkunze ukuntu avuze Icyongereza, nabonye namwe mwabishimye. Ibi bintu nari nabyifuje cyane, ariko birumvikana perezida we avuga Igifaransa cyane kuruta avuga Icyongereza, ariko naramwumvise avuga Icyongereza ejo bundi. Hari inama aherutse kujyamo n'umuperezida uvuga Icyongereza, banza ari perezida Cyril Ramaphosa, barikingirana rwose, nta mu interprete bari bafite bombi, at least ibyo nabonye ku ifoto. Arabizi, azi Icyongereza, kandi ku nyungu za international z'abantu muri rusange, cyane cyane bari abantu bavuga Icyongereza, nibo bafite urugezigezi cyane kurusha abandi. So byari byiza koko aba avuga kuri iyi, donc avuga mu rurimi rw'Icyongereza. Aragarutse avuze mu Cyongereza, avuga ati amagambo twarayumvise ni menshi cyane, icyo dukeneye ni ibikorwa. Ni menshi yaravuzwe, ariko ibikorwa. Naho yaragarutse amusubiza, ariko avuze point, agenda munyomoza biriya byo kuba ngo ntiyaje muri ngo byo ku meza, ngo Kongo niyo ngo itaragiye, ibintu by'ibinyoma, ku buryo byavuze ko yameshe Rwamucyo n'i Kigali, ku buryo Rwamucyo atigeze asubira no muri babaje bati hari ufite ijambo na perezida wa konseye uriya reperezanta wa Algeria nawe yarebye ku ruhande areba ku ruhande aravuga ati ese birashoboka ndi hari icyo misinga ibi bintu bavuze byose arabimize arabyemeye. Aka kantu yavuze mu cyongereza ndaza kukabashakira konyine ubwako nzakagarure ubwako kugira ngo nzagasubizeho niko karimo kafashe summary y'ibi byose. Reka tutegereze rero ibiza ikiri buze gukurikira kuko harakurikira press conference, ariko numvise ko yavuze icyo ashaka n'icyatumye bagaruka kiri clear, icyo ashaka n'icyatumye bagaruka uno munsi. Kadushake niba ko twabona turebe ko twabona iriya press conference ya Madame Denise Kayikwamba. I'm sorry, Therese Kayikwamba. Aha. Mureke munyihanganire gatoya ndiho ndabashakira iya press conference kuko bavuze ko aza kuyikora akimara kuvuga kiriya kiganiro. So niba ntayibonye ubu ngubu ubwo turi buze kongera ya masaha yacu ya saa tatu. Ni muri UN yavuze ko akora press conference immediately, ako kanya akimara kurangiza iriya nama. Amadakika makeya munyihanganire, munyihanganire rwose, niko ndashaka kumenya ko nayibashyiriraho live nayo. Okay, reka turebe ko ntabyo mbona, ndabona itaraza. Ndabona itaratangira, keretse niba ari uko itaratangira, ariko ubundi nawe kandi ashobora kuba ari no mu manama, c'est possible ko yaba bakiri mu manama, nabyo birashoboka. RDC muraza kunyanganira rero, ubwo ndibaza ko iyi ngiyi icyo twakora twayisubizaho yenda hatoya, ninyibona ndaza kuyikata nyibasubirizeho kuko biragaragara ko itaratangira. Rebe kuri Top Congo FM, abantu banjye ndabona nta kintu barimo kumbwira, birashoboka ko ntayihari cyangwa se itaratangira. Mwakoze gutanga rero ibitekerezo byanyu, reka mbasuhuza, ariko kandi ndanga kugenda ngasanga yenda iyi yatangiye. Okay, ntabwo iratangira, ubwo ndabikonfirimye, ntabwo irabaho. Ubwo nirangira ndibuze kugaruka nanone kuko bishobora kuba yenda kiri mu zindi consultation. Okay, reka rero dusezeraneho kuri ubu, ndaza kubakonfirima saa tatu niba gahunda zidahindutse. Haracyari conflit kuri dosiye ya Dr. Kambanda, ariko ndaza kubabwira close yegereye ariya masaha, ariko haracyafite ka conflit. Niba gakomeje nabwo ndaza kubamenyesha. Reka rero reka dusezeraneho kuri ubu ngubu turi buze kongera hatoya. Yes, 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 my people, yatunejeje cyane. Muyihangane ndebe ko nabona update iyi press conference, kuko bari babitubwiye ko ikurikira ako kanya. So what is going on? Ni ibiki cyahindutse? Njyewe hari umuntu uvuye ahangaha yumvise ikiri buze kuba kuri u Rwanda? Nizere ko musanta ibyo nanjye namaze gusanta. Mwabibonye ko hari ibihano bitutumba byaje byarangiye? Njye nabibonye. Kandi ahangaha ntimukazavuge ngo nahanuye, kuko twari kumwe twese, nta kintu tutabonye, ariko apparemment bisa nkaho birangiye. Icyo ngicyo cyo kiremejwe byanze bikunze. That was great. Njye nabikunze, kuko no kuba byonyine baragumyeho bakongera bakasaba bakaguma New York kugira ngo abanze arebe ko hari Kagame yubahirizwa biriya bintu byo bamuhaye gasopo. Sha ngo ujya gupfa soma impyisi kweri. Bavandimwe, update reka nzihorere tuze kuziganiraho ngarutse mu kanya. Ni mu kanya gatoya cyane. So we see each other n'ubundi mu masaha ya 3:00. Ngiye byiza. Iyi yari iyo kugira gusa ngo tuvuge kuri aka kanama k'umutekano. Ciao.